Hi everyone, welcome along to the paper one revision course. I am having some technical issues just as an FYI, so my smartboard has decided to not be very smart, but we'll make do, it's all good, the show will go on. So thank you to those of you that have been submitting questions and asking questions. I'll try and cover as much as I can in the session that we have together. If you guys have any questions as well, just as a note, because I know most of you probably are watching it on YouTube, you can leave comments on YouTube. I think it should be enabled. If it isn't, then you can actually join me on Zoom. The code for Zoom, the webinar is 890-4361-6053. So again, that's 890-4361-6053. And the passcode for that is 577661. So passcode 577661. Alternatively, by the way, feel free to go on our website and you can get inquiries, email, and send emails over there. I will have a look on my phone every now and then to see if there are questions. Hopefully I cover quite a range of different things anyway. So, okay, cool. Let's warm up a little bit with like a sort of a Section A type question, which is drawn from the 2021 paper. So I will share my screen to give you guys access to that as well. So let's have a look. A-level economics, paper one, and I want to have a look at 2021. And the question I wanted to do is a very basic, hopefully, supply and demand question, just to kind of warm us up a little bit. So Section A, as you know, is multiple choice and small questions. And this is an example of a question that I wanted to look at. So it says, cobalt is a key metal used in the batteries of electric cars. China is the world's largest producer of electric cars, but has recently cut subsidies to its manufacturers. Right. What I want you to do is, as you're reading this, like a question like this, is underline the key words. So firstly, it's a metal that is used in the production of battery cars, right? It's the batteries of electric cars. China is cutting subsidies, right? Let's think about what that does straight away if we're dealing with like a supply and demand question. If they're cutting subsidies, normally a subsidy would cause supply to shift outwards. So now it would cause supply to shift inwards. So the number of electric cars, is it going to go up or go down? Well, it's going to go down. And if they're producing less electric cars, will they demand more or less of this product? Well, they will demand less. So the first thing we should be thinking of immediately is demand for this product must be going down. Okay, so that's the first part. Then it says, the Democratic Republic of the Congo produces more than 60% of the world's supply of cobalt from its small scale mines. Again, underline, they supply basically the majority of the cobalt. Many new small mines opened in 2018 as a result of improved expectation of profit. Okay, so if there are new mines, what's shifting? Now it's supply shifting outwards. The following graph shows the price of cobalt between 2018 and 2019 June. Okay, cool. What's happened to the price? We can clearly see the price is going down. Right. Just wanted to address this. With reference to the information provided, draw a supply and demand diagram to show why the price of cobalt fell between 2018 and 2019. Now, in an ideal world, I'd be drawing it on my pad. This is not an ideal world. So we're going to basically annotate it. Hopefully it will be pretty clear. So you draw a standard supply and demand diagram. So we'll go straight down here. So this, I don't know why it's in blue, but we'll go with it. It looks nice. And you're going to have this, and let's label. Right. So we've got S1 and we have D1. Okay. Right. Please make sure that you also label the axes. They've left it unlabeled. So price, quantity. You could just write, by the way, write P and Q. That's completely fine. And then you want to dot down straight away from the initial equilibrium. So I'll do my best. It's not very nice, but it is with a laptop. And over here, we have the initial price. Okay. Now, when there is more than one shift, and we basically figured out based on reading the data that it's going to be multiple shifts, it's supply and demand shifting. The best thing to do is to shift them before labeling the final equilibrium. In other words, don't shift supply and then label equilibrium and then shift demand, label the new equilibrium. Just shift them both in the direction they need to shift and then label the final equilibrium. So we know from the data that because they're cutting subsidies to the Chinese firms are not going to produce as many of these cars. They're not going to demand as much of this product. So demand is going to shift inwards. So let's shift it inwards like this. We'll call that D2. And at the same time, there's going to be an outward shift of supply because new mines have opened in the Democratic Republic of Congo. So supply will shift outwards. Now, how much you shift it, it doesn't actually matter. The only thing here is the price, the change in the price. It needs to be going down, and it will because both are acting to reduce the price. So here we go, supply, and I can label that S2. All I do now is I label the final equilibrium, nothing else. Okay, so we have the following. So let's pretend that's nice straight lines, and let's pretend that that's not bad. Okay, and the final price then is this. It's going to be P2 and Q2. Okay, be careful, by the way. Sometimes the question is just one factor shifting, so only supply or only demand. But sometimes there is two things that are shifting. In this case, two things shifted. If you only shifted supply or only shifted demand, you would not pick up the 4 marks. Cool. Hopefully that's fairly straightforward in terms of how to approach a question like that. Right. Okay. Let's do one more question that's I regard as slightly easier, and then we'll start jumping into some much more deep and complex stuff. Let's stop. So wait on as the annotating. Oh, here we go. Okay. Right. The 2022 paper last year, as a 5 marker, had the following question. So just let me load it up. Here we go. It says, with reference to figure 1, calculate the 3-firm concentration ratio for branded coffee shop chains. Right, just to clarify, the concentration ratio basically is how much of a market's output is accounted for by a certain number of firms. In this case, obviously 3 firms, the 3 biggest firms. The most common thing that people get wrong on this is that they add others. Others is not a firm, just to clarify. The other thing to clarify is that this number is always expressed as a percentage, which is the only thing that potentially could have stumbled you on this particular question. So let's have a look at figure 1. We want to calculate the 3 biggest firms. Okay, so if I look at figure 1, you can tell they made our life easier because look, they've told you the actual number. And this is in terms of the number of shops, yeah? So I need to convert that into percentages and take the top 3 and do it. So let's see. If we add up the 3 biggest firms, what do we have? Well, the 3 biggest firms are obviously Starbucks, Costa, Starbucks, and Cafe Nero. All right, let's do it together. So we do 2681 plus 1025 plus 648. So in totality, that gives me, let me write that number down over here. I get 4354. Okay, that is their total, those 3 added together. But now I need to divide that number by the total industry output. So I keep adding now. Let's add another 50, add another 40, add a 30, and add 3748. Okay, the total industry output is 8,222. How do I therefore calculate this as a percentage? Very straightforward. I now do 4354 divided by the total 8222. And remember, it's a percentage, so you multiply that number by 100. And so you should have got 52.96% if we're going to 2 decimal places. It's not a big deal. You could have done it as 53%, by the way. So something along those lines, yeah? That would basically get you the 5 marks. That is an example of a 5 marker, by the way, where I expect you to get full marks in far less than 5 minutes to be able to give yourself a bit more time for other questions. Okay, cool. Right, let's get started in terms of something a bit more, hopefully challenging and exciting. And the question I'd like you to write down is based on the locked specimen paper, paper 3, but it's also based on the June 2015 Unit 3 paper. In a nutshell, it could say something along the lines of, assess the factors necessary for the success of a cartel. So on your piece of paper, write down, assess the factors necessary for the success of a cartel. Okay, right. If this were asked in the exam on Thursday, it is obviously very important for you to understand what a cartel is and then be able to have a pretty much set answer to a question like this. So firstly, what is a cartel? A cartel is basically a group of firms or countries who collude with one another. In other words, they work together, right? So that's a nice, pretty crisp definition. A cartel is where a group of firms collude with one another. And what is collusion? Collusion is where firms will fix an artificially high price by restricting their output and behaving as if they were a monopoly. Okay, so if the biggest suppliers in the market collaborate with one another and they all restrict their supply, think about it from a supply and demand perspective, supply shifts in and the consequences of that is the price now goes up. Okay, so for a question like this, you start off with a very basic definition of what a cartel is, like I just defined, and I would define collusion as well. I would then do the following. Think about the way you can kind of work through answers like this is to go, okay, in what topic does this come up? Where do I see collusion? Well, collusion comes under game theory, and game theory comes under an oligopoly. And that's a massive hint. Number 1 is the market structure must be an oligopoly. It would not work in monopolistic competition and definitely not in perfect competition. The logic is this. Imagine like the hairdressing industry. Do you agree the hairdressing industry is made up of thousands upon thousands of firms? Loads and loads of small hairdressers across the country. Is it plausible for those hairdressers to work together and collude and have like a fixed price? Realistically, no, there are too many of them for it to work in terms of the logistics. Therefore, the more concentrated a market, the easier it is for them to collude with one another. Okay, I mean, we just calculated the 3-firm concentration ratio amongst the three big cafe chains, they could probably collude because they own more than half of the market. The key thing to understand here is that it's because of the fact that it's logistically more it's a lot more straightforward to organize a collusive agreement when there's only a handful of big firms rather than loads of small firms. That's your first analysis, by the way. And within that point, very importantly, is to understand that the number one seller, the biggest firm in that market, must be part of the collusive agreement for it to succeed, okay? In the context of the UK supermarket industry, a collusive agreement, a cartel, would not work unless Tesco were involved. And the logic of why is because if Tesco were not involved and all the others started to collude, Tesco's prices would now be lower than all theirs. And therefore, as a consequence, everyone would now switch over, or large numbers of customers would switch over to Tesco. Tesco are big enough to absorb all the extra customers. So it would not make sense for the others to collude without Tesco being part of the collusive agreement. Cool? That is, without a shadow of a doubt, number one. The first analysis in terms of why collusive agreements, it makes sense. Let's evaluate. Every single time we're dealing with a question about collusion or a cartel, you evaluate with something called prisoner's dilemma. Prisoner's dilemma is best illustrated through a payoff matrix. So hopefully this is going to work. I'm going to just stop sharing here and share the whiteboard that they use on Zoom. I haven't used this in absolutely ages. Presenting, open board. Okay, give me 1 second, it's just loading up. Yeah. Anyone can show. Oh, can I not show you guys the board? Okay, if I can't show you guys the board, there must be a way. I am so incompetent technologically. That's really annoying. Give me a sec. Okay, I hope you guys can see my board now. Can you see my board? Let me see it on the screen. It's working or not? I think so. Right. So we're going to go through a payoff matrix and understand how. Can you guys see this? Give me 1 second. Let me just check. Someone can write. All right, but it's just really slow for that load up. Someone write on the chat, those of you that are here. Can you see my board? We can see, perfect, amazing, thank you. All right, cool, right. Let's go through prisoner's dilemma. Prisoner's dilemma is a really important thing for you to understand. Prisoner's dilemma is basically illustrating, or going to illustrate, why collusive agreements will break down by themselves pretty much in the long run. The logic is as follows. So imagine there are two people, myself and let's say someone called Jim. Jim and I have committed two crimes. The first crime is a fairly petty crime. The second is a far more serious crime. Now, the police only have enough evidence to charge us for the more petty crime, but they suspect us of the more serious crime. So what they're now going to do is they're going to put myself and Jim into two separate cells and tell us the following. They're going to say to me, listen, Ahmed, if you confess and Jim does not confess, we will give you immunity and he will get 10 years prison time. In reverse, if you don't confess and he does confess, he'll get immunity and you're going to get 10 years prison time. In the event that you both confess, you're both going to get 5 years prison time. And in the final event that neither of us confess, they can only charge us for the petty crime. Therefore, the outcome is that they only charge us for 2 years prison time. Okay, let's actually depict this on what's called the payoff matrix, which I'm sure you guys have by now seen. And it will look something like this. Okay, now that I know that you guys can see the board, feel more comfortable. Let's do it. Okay, so we are going to have the following. So we're going to have one of the players at the top here. So let's have Jim there. Okay, and over here is going to be the other player, which is myself. It'd be good if I could spell my name. And our moves are as follows. So let's add in. Right, ignore how terribly disproportionate my lines are. Here we go. Okay, right. So the two moves we had were confess and don't confess. So let's put confess over here. Now I'm going to depict don't confess by DC to just make our life a bit easier. Yeah, so DC, and over here we have confess. And over here, don't confess. Okay, right. Okay, so the way a payoff matrix works, by the way, they asked the question last year in the in section 8. I will go through it in a second of asking you to draw a payoff matrix. I will do that in a moment. But in a nutshell, we described the following. He said, look, if I confess, so the player on the left-hand side, by the way, so me, their number is always the number on the left of the box, and the right number represents the player at the top, in this case, Jim. Yeah. So we said, look, if Jim confesses and I confess, both Jim and I are going to get 5 years prison time. So that's no idea. We're going to get -5, and he's going to get -5. Cool. In the event that I do not confess and Jim does confess, what happens now is that I get 10 years prison time. So I get minus 10. He gets nothing. He gets immunity. Now I can flip the game over to go to the other side and go, okay, let's go through the scenario where I confess and he does not confess. I now get immunity, minus 10 for him. And then finally, in the outcome that neither of us confess, we both get minus 2. Minus 2, minus 2. Okay, right. Ignoring how scattered my numbers all are. If you look at those numbers and you look at the 4 different outcomes that could arise, which is clearly the best outcome for Jim and I collectively? Imagine you don't know us, you have no loyalty towards either of us. Clearly, the best outcome for us is this, minus 2, minus 2. Agreed? The best outcome is for both of us to not play confess. We're going to try to illustrate why that is never the outcome of the game. The technical name for that, by the way, is the Nash equilibrium. Edexcel can't ask you about that, but Educas, OCR, AQA, they may ask you about the Nash equilibrium. The Nash equilibrium is basically a fancy way of basically saying the outcome of the game. The way you play the game is as follows. Let's play as me first and go, all right, imagine that we're assuming that Jim is playing confess. The only thing that we're going to be looking at is where he's playing confess over here, yeah? So if he plays confess, is it better for me to confess and get minus 5 or better for me to not confess and get minus 10? Clearly, it is better for me to confess and get minus 5, right? So all right, let's underline that move to illustrate that was the better outcome for me. Cool? Still playing as me, but now let's assume that Jim is playing don't confess. Is it better for me to confess and get nothing? Or is it better for me to not confess and get 2 years prison time? Well, obviously, I'd rather get no prison time than 2 years prison time. So the best outcome for me, again, was to play confess. Did you notice something? Did you notice that I played confess irrespective of what Jim did? It did. I always play confess. It was always my better move. I have what we call a dominant strategy. Right, let's flip the game over. Let's now play as Jim and go, all right, imagine that Ahmed's playing confess. Is it better for Jim to confess and get minus 5 or to not confess and get minus 10? Obviously for him, it's also to confess. Let's underline his move. And then we go, all right, imagine Ahmed's playing don't confess. Is it better for Jim to confess and get nothing or to not confess and get minus 2? Obviously, again, he will confess. Notice that of the 4 boxes that we have, only one of them has both lines underlined, and that is confess, confess. It was the dominant strategy for me, and it was the dominant strategy for him. We both end up playing confess, confess. Our dominant strategy and the outcome, the Nash equilibrium of this game, is that we both end up confessing. Now, how does that relate to economics, and how does that relate to a question about whether a cartel will be successful? The reason is because rather than thinking of it as Jim and Ahmed as an example, imagine instead we had the following scenario where we said, okay, Tesco, Asda. If they play high price, that is the outcome that is the best for them, where they collude. But there is always an incentive to break out of that collusive agreement. And there are 2 reasons why. One is, Asda think, you know what, if we lower our price, we're going to gain profit at Tesco's expense. But Tesco think the exact same thing. So what ends up happening is they both end up playing low price, low price. The second reason why cartels tend to break down is because there's always an incentive to be a whistleblower. Whistleblower is basically, I mean, to put it bluntly, the snitch, right? The person who goes to the regulator and goes, oh, I'm so sorry, we've been lying and colluding and all that, right? Why, by the way, why would you be the whistleblower? Because you get immunity, whilst the others in the cartel are going to receive heavy fines. So it's likely that collusive agreements will break down. Now, let's develop this, by the way, in terms of the June 2022 paper. I'm going to quickly just share that in a second. Let's close the whiteboard and let's open last year's paper. Let's have a look. Okay, so I think this actually is the paper, isn't it? Yes, this one. So this caused a lot of people a lot of issue. So let's have a read of it. It says, Pilgrim's Pride is the 2nd largest chicken supplier in the US. It will pay a $107.9 million fine for price fixing with Tyson Foods and other chicken suppliers. The firm's limited production to force price higher and harm major consumers, including KFC. Oh, blasphemy. Pilgrim's Pride is thought to have gained at least $361 million in total revenue from the collusion. Draw a simple 2 outcome game theory model to show why the chicken suppliers may have colluded. Okay, first things first, by the way, you did not actually have to use their numbers. I would have, I'm not gonna lie, like I think it's easier to, makes more sense to use their numbers, but you didn't have to. Let's draw this payoff matrix together. So if you want to have this paper open, June 2022, it's question number 4, and I'm gonna quickly just share the whiteboard instead. If this would work. And okay, right. Let's have a quick go at drawing it. So we had the two firms were, right. 1, 2, okay. So Tyson Foods, Tyson, I'm going to write Tyson just to make it save time, and Pilgrim. Okay, right. In the top left box, by the way, a decent thing to do is write revenue, and it was expressed in dollars and also it's expressed in millions of dollars. So I'm going to do revenue, millions of dollars. And now the two moves are, think about what collusive agreements are. They're high price, high price. Yeah. So we're going to have high price, and over here, low price, and over here, high price, and over here, low price. Again, ignore how horrendously I have drawn this out. But in a nutshell, these are the things. Okay. The only number that we actually know, by the way, is the 361. We know that they basically collude and they should both get 361. Now, we're not told that they both get that, but it's easier to make that assumption. So I'm going to go, okay, Tyson, if they play high price, are going to get 361. And Pilgrim will also get 361. That is my first number. From here on, by the way, you make up the numbers, but it has to make sense and actually work. So what I want you to do to understand how to draw a payoff matrix is this. The number that they basically get when they collude is the same. Then you go, okay, whoever's playing low price, so in this case, Tyson, they are now going to gain more. So their number is going to be bigger than 361. And the firm that's playing high price while the others are playing low price, they're going to lose out. So their money needs to go down below 361. All right, let's make our life nice and easy. Let's do something like 500. So if you basically play a low price, you're going to get 500 million revenue. And the other firm will now lose money. So let's say they go down to 100. Okay. Now, once I've inserted that number, my life is made far easier because what I now do is that top right box, flip the numbers. You just flip the numbers now. So you go, okay, well, now if Tyson are playing high price and Pilgrim are playing low price, Tyson are going to lose out. They're going to get 100 million, whilst Pilgrim are going to get the 500 million. FYI, by the way, how many marks have I picked up out of the 4? You've now picked up 3 of the 4 marks. I mean, I do still want you to pick up all 4 marks, but 3 out of 4 marks for a question like that is really okay. Like, it's still going to add up. It's going to be good. Yeah. The last number is here is low price, low price. And the way to always calculate this, an easy way to remember it, is the number needs to be below what they would gain if they played high price, but above what happens in the event that they basically got backstabbed. So any number between 101 million, even 100.1, I guess, to 361, we're good, right? Let's make our life easy. Let's go 200, 200. So I'm going to go 200, 200. Okay. And that is the payoff matrix that answers that question really well. If you look at, by the way, the examiner report, if your teachers have access to this, whereby the answer that got 4 out of 4, honestly, the numbers were like, it was so funny. It was like they put for high price like 5.5, and then for low price like 2.2, and I can't remember exactly what the numbers, but like as in they did it in such a simplistic way. That will get you the marks. Okay, right, back to our essay. Back to the factors necessary for a cartel to succeed. What you would now say is, however, games such as Prisoner's Dilemma illustrate that cartels tend to break down in the long run. This is because there is always an incentive for one of the firms to undercut the other to gain profits at their expense. There is also the incentive to whistleblow so that they get immunity whilst their rivals get heavy fines. Cool? That is an exceptional, by the way, evaluation to collusion. It is such a strong eval, and it satisfies the criteria if you get a question, like in the June 2019 paper 3, which says use game theory in your answer. I've just used game theory in your answer. 1, 1. Let's do the second analysis. We need the second analysis for a question like this. There's one more condition I think is nailed on as always going to be on the mark scheme in terms of what is necessary for a cartel to succeed. And that condition is that the good being sold needs to be priced in elastic. Can I clarify why? Inelastic, as I'm sure you guys know, is that the demand for a good is not very reactive to changes in the price. In other words, when the price goes up, demand decreases, it falls, but less than proportionally. If demand for a good was elastic, it would not make sense to collude. The reason why it would not make sense to collude is because if you collude when something is elastic, you raise your price a little bit, there will be a more than proportionate decrease in demand for your good, and therefore you end up with less revenue, not more revenue. What's the point of that? Doesn't make sense. Therefore, you go, the good needs to be priced in elastic. In the lock specimen paper, it was about OPEC and oil producing countries. Is oil inelastic? Yes. Now you justify why. Why is it inelastic? Well, most cars still run on oil. Most factories and means of production still use oil. It is very, very much inelastic, at least now. Yeah. like I said, I highly recommend in the old spec, Unit 3, there's a data response about Chinese formula milk. And there's a 12 marker about why was it possible for price fixing to take place? Well, it basically spoke about how the PED for the formula milk amongst the foreign companies was extremely inelastic because the Chinese companies, their formula milk, there was a big scandal. It led to like babies dying and like just all sorts of really bad stuff. So if you're a parent, do you agree you're almost willing to pay no matter what the price is for the foreign formula milk that you perceive to be safer? Anything that you can basically use to justify why the PED is inelastic, it could be a lack of substitutes in the market, etc., etc. That will allow them to form a cartel because they now know that an increase in the price leads to a less than proportionate decrease in demand. Hence, they end up with more revenue, and it therefore makes sense. Eval every single time talk about how in the long run it's likely to become more elastic for a variety of reasons. So, for example, oil. Why might oil become more elastic in the long run? Well, they're basically coming up with different forms of energy like shale gas and fracking and whatnot. They're talking about like more people are starting to switch to like electric cars. So just anything in the long run, everything becomes slightly more elastic, right? An example of the Chinese formula milk, well, over time reputational damage might fade. The government in the extract was subsidizing the Chinese firms, so maybe their quality will start to improve and people might be open to switching and there might genuinely be substitutes, etc., etc., etc. You just need to find a reason why in the long run demand might start to become more elastic. That's 12 out of 12. Hopefully that's pretty clear. Right, I got asked the question. I just want to address it since we're talking about game theory. In terms of the King demand curve, do you need it? When can you use it? Is it useful? Okay. Number one is none of the examples, especially at Edexcel, but none of the examples can ever ask you a question directly about the King demand curve. It is no longer part of the specification in the sense that they're not allowed to ask, they're not allowed to, for example, draw your King demand curve in section A, go, what's happening here, nor are they allowed to ask a question saying, oh, use the King demand curve in your answer. Nonetheless, you can use it, and if you use it, it will be on the mark scheme and it will get credit. I'm not a massive fan, can't lie. I don't think it's an amazing theory, but it's an easy thing to understand. So very quickly, I will go through it, and then I'll explain once I go through it when you are able to basically use it. So let's clear this and just quickly draw the following. Right, it's so much easier if I could draw this by hand, but technology has abandoned me today. Right, let's have a look. Okay. Right, there is a more complex version of this diagram, and there is a very simple version of the diagram. Just because I want to get through quite a lot, I want to go through the more simple version because actually you can get all the marks by drawing the simple version and then explaining it in words. And it's not a necessity anyway. So anyways, we've got price over here and quantity over here. Okay, let's assume that this is an oligopolist such as Tesco. And let's assume initially they are going to operate at this point here that I'm going to call point A. Okay, that is not the prettiest A in the world, but it will do. At point A, this is the quantity they are producing. And this is the price they are charging for their product. Okay, on the average price, let's say, of the goods they're selling. Okay, right. Let's summarize what the King demand curve is actually going to say, and then show how it will show it. Which is, it says, look, it does not make sense for oligopolists to try to compete with one another through prices. They should not engage in pricing strategies. Any pricing strategy is doomed to fail, and it's a really bad idea. And this is how they justify that theory. The King demand curve says, imagine that Tesco are initially operating at point A. And now Tesco decide to raise their price above PE. What will the other oligopolists, the other supermarkets do, assuming they are behaving in a competitive manner? So what will Asda do? What will Sainsbury's do? Waitrose, etc. According to the theory, they will keep their prices unchanged. And as a result of that, now Tesco's prices are higher than everyone else's. And therefore, according to the theory, loads of customers will now switch away from Tesco to the other supermarkets. Hence, demand above PE, is it reactive or not reactive? Well, based on what I just described, it is very, very reactive. It's very elastic. So what we draw is above PE, like over here, demand will be really, really, really inelastic. Yeah. Now, what you'll notice is a very small increase in the price. If I can point the spotlight, there we go. A very small increase in the price, let's say from PE to where that spotlight is now. If I go across the demand curve, look at how enormous the decrease in demand is. It results in a more than proportionate decrease in demand. Does it therefore make sense for Tesco to raise their price? No, because they lose out in terms of revenue. Scenario number two. Scenario number two is if they now decide to reduce their price. Let's say Tesco go, okay, we're operating at PE. We've now decided to lower our price. What will the other supermarkets do? What will Asda, Waitrose, M&S do? Well, according to the theory, it makes sense for them to also reduce their price because they don't want customers to switch over to Tesco. But if they all start reducing their prices, is there going to be a dramatic increase in the demand for Tesco? Not really. Yes, they might get a few more customers because they're offering lower prices. People might consume more, but there isn't going to be a dramatic shift in the sense that demand then is very, very inelastic. There's a tiny increase. Better way to describe that is the decrease in the price would lead to a less than proportionate increase in the demand. So I can draw that by going from point A and making it really, really, really inelastic, something like that, right? And again, if I just kind of get the spotlight up and go, okay, look, imagine they reduce the price from PE all the way down to like over here. And you go across, can you see the demand hardly shift? Like there's a teeny tiny increase in demand, but there was a dramatic decrease in price. Does it therefore make sense for Tesco to reduce their price below PE? Well, the answer is very much no. So in both scenarios, Tesco were worse off by raising or reducing their price. According to the theory, then they should not compete through prices. Okay, I'm not going to get started about why the theory is rubbish. It's rubbish, but right. When can you use it? You can use it in two scenarios. One I actually think is useful. The other, I'm not so much of a fan. The first is that you could talk about it as an evaluation for any pricing strategy, including collusion, by the way, to say, look, does it make sense for them to engage in pricing strategies? Not a fan, though. If I had to tick off the box of like use game theory, 100% Prisoner's Dilemma, I think is better, right? That's the first scenario. The only scenario where I can see this being really useful is if the question is about why a firm is not adjusting its price. So if you get a question about why is it that, let's say the supermarkets are not competing on price, or why they're not raising their prices or reducing their prices, or whatever the question might be, this could actually be used as analysis to justify why they might not be adjusting prices. Does that make sense? So that would be where you'd use the kink demand curve. In all honesty, I don't really think you're going to use it, but you never know. Okay, cool. Right. Hopefully that ticks off that box as well. Right. Some of you are asking questions in the chat. I promise I will get through them really quickly. Mobility of labor. Yes, I can. Okay. All right. Someone, a quick, sorry, because I just noticed. Someone was asking about, do you have to put 361 as the application marks for the Pilgrim's Pride and Tyson Foods question? No, you just had to apply it in terms of the two firms and high price, low price. Or you could have also written, by the way, collude, not collude, or even like cheat, right? As well. That would also count as application. Okay. Will you do more lives for paper 2 and 3? Yes, they are on our Instagram page, but that's at the end. I'll chat about that at the end. Right. Okay. Right. Am I going to dictate what you write, or should you write notes as you go along? I do not have time to dictate exactly what to write. This is also recorded. You will be able to watch it back in your own time on YouTube, but try to cover as much as I can in the space of time that I have. All right. Right. Next question. Are we ready? Let's do a 25 marker on a merger. Oh, fun times for us. If this comes up, count your lucky star. This is a dream question. If you get something along the lines of evaluate the microeconomic effects of mergers in a market of your choice, we are in full-on like la la land at that point. Let's go through how we would basically answer a question like that. So the starting point in the introduction, by the way, in a 25 marker is whereby if you're running out of time, it's the least important paragraph, just to clarify. So it's the one paragraph that you can omit if you don't have time. But it's simply where you kind of go through key definitions, some of which are explicit definitions. Sometimes they are implicit definitions. What I mean by that is clearly a merger here is an explicit definition, and I would probably define what type of merger this is. An implicit definition is, so for June 2017, paper 1 has a question about them imposing a tax on soft drinks like Coca-Cola and Pepsi. The explicit definition there is obviously tax. So it was an indirect tax and it was specifically an ad valorem tax. The implicit definition, what is implied is, what are soft drinks and why are they therefore taxing them? They are a demerit good, right? So that's an implicit definition. Now, if you can pick that out, it's pretty impressive. Not the end of the world if you can't. There is nothing but an explicit definition here in our question about the effects of a merger, microeconomic effects of a merger. Okay, let's go through it. Analysis number 1. Every single time you have a question about two firms merging with one another, you define in the introduction horizontal integration, which is where two firms merge that are in the same industry and at the same stage of the production process. And now you give an example. I probably give the example of Jaguar and Land Rover merging to become Jaguar Land Rover. Very inventive name, right? Now, first analysis every single time. Now, those of you that are taught by myself, hopefully I'm about to do something and you'll be like you know exactly what I'm talking about. I'm going to do that. I'm going to tap. And those of you that are new to this, tap into your economies of scale. Economies of scale is such an important concept to understand. It is the idea that as a firm gets bigger and bigger and bigger, it enables them to actually reduce their average costs. So number 1, by the way, the first analysis could be something along the lines of one microeconomic effect of the merger between Jaguar and Land Rover is an increase in productive efficiency. My topic sentence, by the way, the first thing that I say, ideally is the overarching point of that paragraph. You guys need to plan your essays, the 25 markers in particular, before you jump into it, so you know what your topic sentence is, know what your chains of reasoning are going to be. Right, let's go through how we develop in as much detail as possible. 25 markers, the key to smashing a 25 marker is the level of depth you give. It's how many chains of reasoning you can give me. And I kind of like sometimes try to like economic blag, you need to drag the points out. So I would go, they become more productively efficient. I would then say, this is because the merged firm are better placed to tap into the economies of scale that exist in the car market. I would now define economies of scale. Economies of scale is where a firm's long run average costs are falling as their output rises. Cool. Once you've done that, you now, every single time in a 15, 12, or 25, I want you to give me an example. And to be honest with you, I kind of always wanted to give you one type of economy of scale. That is called purchasing economies of scale. Purchasing economies of scale, as you should all know, is where you buy in bulk. Every firm needs to buy some sort of raw materials. So this is a really easy one to get application marks. You go, for example, they can exploit purchasing economies of scale, whereby they could bulk buy raw materials such as, okay, tell me, what exactly could they bulk buy? Well, they could bulk buy tires. They could bulk buy steel. They could bulk buy engines. I don't know, like, don't give me like a whole list of things, but definitely give me 2 or 3 things, because that counts as real world knowledge, right? Easy peasy, right? Now, after we basically say that they can tap into economies of scale, we can now start showing off a little bit. The next thing I would now say is this would enable the firm to operate closer to it. Now, hopefully you guys all know, the bottom of the AC curve has a fancy name. It is called the MES, which stands for the minimum efficient scale. So the firm may be able to operate closer to its MES. This translates into the firm being more productively efficient. Right, am I done? It's a 25 marker. Let's go. More depth. There's more depth. And the easy way to develop this point is to go, okay, these lower costs could therefore be translated or could be passed on to the customers in the form of lower prices. And therefore, which efficiency goes up? Allocative. Just a quick word about allocative, by the way. Allocative, you need to know what the rule is. So it's MC equals price or MC equals AR. I kind of need to just know when to use it in an exam, and it's very often. Whenever the consumer is better off, whether they're getting a lower price, getting a better quality, smiling more, they're happier, you're going to say allocative efficiency has gone up. It's such an easy thing to throw in. So here you go, consumers might get a lower price, therefore allocative efficiency may rise. Easy peasy. Cool. That is kind of number 1. Yeah. Let's evaluate. Very straightforward evaluation. Now, as a 25 marker, you can just evaluate with diseconomies of scale. No issue with you doing that whatsoever. It's totally valid. However, you can, if you had the time, broaden the point in the topic sentence to make 2 points in one that work together, but they're not the same thing. The overarching point is the same, but they're not the same thing. You can say, however, the merger may result in the combined firm becoming inefficient. And let me explain why. Number 1 is diseconomies of scale. So you should all know that diseconomies of scale is where your average cost is going up as your output is rising, because the firm might become too big to manage. It might logistically be too challenging to have a firm that spans multiple countries all over the world, that has production plants all over the world, thousands upon thousands of staff. It may start to lead to like a lack of like coordination between the various offices, etc. So just develop this and explain it. 2 is that it may lead to the firm becoming X inefficient. And I just want to quickly draw what that looks like. In a nutshell, by the way, X inefficiency is where a firm incurs unnecessarily high costs. Often it's because of a lack of competition. So here, if 2 firms merge, do you agree the market becomes more concentrated and that firm has more dominance? As a result, they don't need to worry too much about minimizing their costs because they dominate the market. There aren't many other firms that can compete with them. So they don't have to cut their costs as much as they would if there were like loads and loads of firms in the market. So this is how you draw an X inefficiency diagram. Right. We start off by drawing a very straightforward AC curve. Hopefully mine is not going to be horrendously ugly. Not bad. Right, here's our AC curve. Okay. With X inefficiency, the way to draw this is to pick any point on the diagram, any quantity you want. Choose any quantity you want. So let's say this is the quantity here. So I could, okay, if this was the cost, the quantity they're producing, their average cost, so this is Q1, their average cost should be this, right? It should be where it hits the AC curve. That's what their average cost should be. However, due to a lack of competition, let's call that point A. Sorry, pardon my horrendous writing. But due to a lack of competition, in reality, what ends up happening is they incur a cost all the way up here at B, just because there's a lack of competition. So their cost ends up being C2 there. Okay. So basically that distance between A and B, that is how much they are X inefficient by, that distance there. Make sense? So you go, look, there is a danger that the firm may become X inefficient due to a lack of competition in the market. This is where they incur unnecessarily high costs, often due to a lack of competition. They also describe this, by the way, as organizational or managerial slack. Same thing. Yeah. So that can be one paragraph of like how the merger results in them becoming inefficient. Second analysis, unbelievably easy. Second analysis is the merger may also result in the firm becoming more dynamically efficient. And the justification is you go, when the two firms merge with one another, they combine customer bases. And as a consequence of that, AR and MR will shift out. Right. Ideally, I would love to have drawn this on my pad for you to see. I promise I'll fix my pad before the paper 2 session. But there is a YouTube video of me going through step by step how you guys construct diagrams, literally one step at a time. Yeah. Please make sure you watch that and understand how to do that. And then once you've done that cost and revenue diagram, the starting point, guys, I don't want to like alarm you, but I think my board has started working. Give me a sec. Let's share screen and hope for the best. Oh, it's live. Wow, timing. Okay, right. Oh my goodness, I can't believe it's live. Let's draw it together. Right, I take it back. We can draw it. So our starting point is this. We're going to have quantity, cost/revenue. All right. Step-by-step process of constructing this diagram. Step 1, always just do it. It's the Nike tick, MC. Step 2, AR and MR. Now, because I know AR and MR are going to shift out, I'm purposely not going to start too high up on the y-axis. I'm going to start somewhere like over here. I'm going to write AR1 equals D1, and this is MR1. Cool? Profit maximization, as you should all know, is where MC equals MR. That is always the next step, by the way. Go over here, drop down. That's quantity Q1. Go up. That's the price P1. And then let's draw our average cost somewhere over here. You go up from Q1 until you hit the AC curve. And this is C1. Right. I really encourage you guys, rather than shading in your supernormal profit area, to label the corners of the area in letters. So we obviously already have P1 and C1 labeled. Over here, label it as A. And over here, we're labeling it as B. Can't tell you guys how happy I am this is working now. Right. Let's discuss what happens. We said AR and MR are going to shift outwards. The easiest way to do that is just pick a higher point on the y-axis and shift AR and MR parallel. So here we go. This could be AR2 equals D2. And this is MR2. Profit maximization, as always, occurs where MC equals MR. Well, there's a new MR curve. So MC equals MR is now here. You'll see that. This is the new quantity. Go up until you hit the demand curve. That's the new price, P2. And then we go up from the quantity Q2 until we hit the AC curve. Now notice, by the way, it was a coincidence. If yours, when you draw it, the cost doesn't go down. It's not a big deal. Why did my cost go down? My cost went down, by the way, because this firm is actually experiencing economies of scale. I'll explain this in a second. So last thing we need to do is the corners of the areas. So where Q2 hits it there, that's D. And where Q2 hits the AC curve, that's basically E over here. I mean, that's not the nicest, but it will do. Yeah. So my profit area has gone up from P1 ABC1 to P2 DEC2. Make sense? That is basically the profit area. Cool. Right. Let's talk about this diagram. There's a lot to say in terms of this diagram. So the first thing we do is we describe that AR and MR will shift out because the merger results in them sharing customers, and therefore AR and MR shift out. You describe, as a result, the price they charge for their cars will may increase from P1 to P2. Their sales may increase from Q1 to Q2, and their profits increase from P1 ABC1 to P2 DEC2. Every time you talk about profits going up, I now want you to do two things. One is you give an example of what they could do with the added profits, make it up. And two, you're going to say they become more dynamically efficient, and that's beneficial for consumers. So what can they do with the added profits? Well, the additional profits can now be invested into new technology. For example, they might produce a range of like electric cars. They might produce a wider range of cars, including cars that might be more affordable for low-income households, flag, stuff like that, right? They might be able to produce or be more innovative, I don't know, self-driving car, for example, blah, 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 blah. You then say, as a result, dynamic efficiency is likely to rise. And bear in mind, that benefits consumers as well. That is our analysis number 2. Evaluation, really easy. The merger may result in an exploitation of consumers. Super easy. Why? Why might it result in exploitation of consumers? Well, one, do you agree the market has become more concentrated now? If there's a merger between two of the big companies in the car market, there are less firms. As a result, do you as a consumer have more or less choice? less choice. Is the PED for cars becoming more elastic or more inelastic? It's becoming more inelastic due to a lack of substitutes in the market. As a result, they now know that if they raise their price, it is likely to result in a less than proportionate decrease in demand. They make more money doing that, but that is at the expense of consumers. So allocative efficiency and consumer surplus down. That's it. Yeah. In the judgment, you basically want to talk about whether the net effect of like a merger is overall good or bad. You could potentially talk about, it depends on the industry. So for the car market industry, the MES is so hard to reach. It requires so much output for you to fully tap into all the economies of scale to like be able to bulk buy in enough quantity, that it's probably a good idea for the car firms to merge, as long as that then translates into lower prices for consumers. So the regulator should allow mergers to take place in an industry like that, but they should scrutinize or monitor their activities to ensure that consumers are not basically abused or not exploited on the back of the merger. Cool, right, mergers, done, all good? Right, take that off. Let me go through another question. Right, I'm going through as many of your questions as I can see. Okay, mobility of labor. Cool, right. Let's go through very quickly the June 2018 paper. So can you either open it? I'm going to share my screen now. Okay, June 2018, paper 1, as a 15 marker on the mobility of labor. I want to go through the answer. To get the data, you can obviously in your own time then read the data and apply it. It's about the UK energy market. And it says, with reference to extract C and your own knowledge, discuss policies businesses and governments, and is in bold, by the way, on purpose, might implement to reduce labor immobility to benefit the energy sector. Okay, this is pretty much a set answer. I don't really want you to have, I mean, there are loads of different answers that you give me. I kind of think this is the answer to go to on a mobility of labor question. First thing about exam technique here, yeah? You will get capped if you only talk about businesses or only talk about the government in terms of the answer, but I would not combine them together. I would have one analysis just on what the government can do and evaluate that. And I'd have one analysis on what the businesses, firms can do, and I would evaluate that. Now, the data is really helpful here, by the way, but just to kind of give us a bit more time to do more things. The first thing that governments can do, but this also, by the way, would have worked for business, but government could do, is invest into education and training programs. That is always on the mark scheme. Which mobility of labor would that rectify? So we should know there are two types of mobility. There's geographical mobility of labor and there's occupational mobility of labor. Geographical mobility of labor is basically how easy it is for an individual to move from one area to another to take up a job. That could be, by the way, within the UK, but it could also be from abroad. So that's one. And number two is occupational mobility of labor, is how easy it is to go from one sector to another to take up a job. So education and training, which of the two does that rectify? Well, clearly it's going to be occupational mobility of labor, right? So you go, one policy that the government could implement to reduce the occupational mobility of labor in the energy sector is to invest into education and training programs. Right, the extract talks extensively about there's a skills shortage in the energy sector. It talks about how there's not enough people doing engineering and kind of science-based subjects at university. Well, okay, what do you do then? You basically will provide education schemes to try to encourage more people. Let's say subsidize education by making it cheaper for people to take engineering-related degrees. They could, for example, go and run promotional campaigns as well at university, well, maybe before universities, at school. It said like especially women were not really part of the industry. And they can develop the skills necessary. Individuals can develop the skills necessary to take up the jobs in this sector and fill the skills shortage. It says at one point that something like 29%, there we go, 29% of employers basically say that they have unfilled vacancies. So nice and easy, yeah? So you basically need to, there we go, it even says, education training programs, yeah? That's the analysis. Evaluation is so easy here. Time lag takes ages, especially in an industry where the skills required are high and technical. It's not a quick fix. This is not something that's going to immediately like be rectified through education and training. And it literally says it in the data again. The data is so helpful. So it says, where is it? Here we are, this. These cannot be replaced as a long time period is required for training and developing worker skills in a highly regulated industry. This is not a quick fix to the problem that they basically have, okay? So one analysis, one evaluation. Second analysis. Now, in terms of businesses, what can businesses do? Well, businesses might want to encourage people to move so that they are working in that sector, like as in move from one part of the UK or from abroad to come and take up the jobs here. The easiest way to deal with that or to get people to come over is provide housing subsidies. Housing subsidies is basically a firm paying essentially for the rent of employees. That happens all the time, by the way, like when companies want especially big companies want you to relocate, they'll pay for your accommodation for the first like 6 months, year, whatever it is. Yeah. So you can go another policy that could be used, or a policy that could be used by businesses to increase the geographical mobility of labor, is housing subsidies. And then you explain that. You talk about how this will entice more people to move to those areas where the energy companies work. But in particular, by the way, remember how we talked about the skills will take a long time to develop? You're going to therefore need to try and attract people that already have the skills. So here we go. Recruit skilled workers from overseas. How do you get people from overseas to come over? Offer them housing subsidies. Make it cheaper for them, reduce their cost of living, make it more attractive. That's the analysis. Evaluation to that every single time. Two things. Number one, it talks about this sector being dominated predominantly by older people. Older people, and even if it didn't say this, by the way, you could always use this in evaluation. One of the things that stops you from moving from one area to another or from one country to another is your family. And if you have a spouse, and in particular, if you've got kids, it is far easier for you, far more difficult, for you to move. Therefore, that means that geographically it's still immobile. Does that make sense? So you go, however, given that this industry is dominated by workers above the age of 50, so 2/3 of them are above the age of 50, it is more likely that these individuals have families, and thus it may be more difficult for them to relocate and move. So even if you offer them housing subsidies, it might not be sufficient to get them to uproot their whole life, get their kids to leave their school and their wife and or husband to basically move, etc., etc. Second eval within the paragraph, it's still basically dealing with the fact that it might not work, is language barriers. If you're recruiting skilled workers from overseas, they might have the technical skills. They might be amazing in terms of the energy sector and know all these things, but they might not speak English. Like in a nuclear, like in an emergency, they can't tell you. It's a disaster, right? So that is the go-to set answer for mobility of labor. Hopefully now, if that comes up, you're in dreamland. Very easy to develop, very easy to evaluate, nice and straightforward. Right, let's take that off of the list. Okay, right, got a lot of questions to get through. You guys, thank you. Keep firing the questions on Zoom. I will try my best to do as many as I can. 2019 6E. Okay, that was actually one of my questions. I want to do that. Right, before we do 2019 6E, we will in a second. I want to show you something about how repetitive questions tend to be in the Edexcel board in particular, and how you navigate your way through it. So let's start with instead the 2018 paper. Actually, we have it open. 2018 paper, amazing. Right, the 2018 paper has a 12 marker, which says, with reference to extract A, discuss the likely effectiveness of measures to open up and increase competition in the UK energy market. 12 marks. Quick little FYI in terms of 12 markers, and I will address this in a moment. Let me add a list of things I need to do. 12 markers where they explicitly say draw a diagram, you only need one analysis. You literally just go and explain why you shifted what you shifted on the diagram, like last year, like 2017 paper 3, like 2018, 2019, not 2018. But anyways, we will do that in a second. This one doesn't have an explicit like draw a diagram for this question, so we need two analysis. We need two analysis and two evaluations. One really well-developed evaluation will suffice, but I prefer you to do two to be safe, yeah? So with reference to extract A, discuss the likely effectiveness of measures to open up and increase competition in the UK energy market. Right, spoiler alert, just to go through in case you have not read this data, everything in terms of the policies they recommend are literally written in bullet point format for you. The one I really like is number 1, the creation of a database designed to help consumers switch energy suppliers. Rival suppliers can directly contact these customers. Right, let's chat about how you deal with this. Your first analysis is going to be something along the lines of one policy or one method to open up and increase competition in the UK energy market is the creation of a database. Your topic sentence needs to be the point you're making, nice and clear. You now use the data. You go according to extract A, and then this. The database is designed to help consumers switch energy suppliers, blah, 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 okay? Right, let's develop let's explain how we develop this point. The reason why this is a great method of regulation is because it reduces information gaps in the sense that consumers now can compare prices more easily. And this creates two things. One, a really clever thing that you can say here is that it actually makes the market more contestable. Quick overview, contestable market can be a market dominated by just a few firms, but the barriers to entry start to fall or are low. In this case, the barriers to entry would fall because of the fact that if consumers now are more informed, do you agree that there's an incentive or an easier route into the market for a new energy firm by going, look, my energy is lower than the price that's being offered to you by British Gas and E.ON and EDF, right? So that definitely makes the market more contestable, and it makes it easier for new firms to enter. So you develop that. But the second thing that can happen when a market becomes contestable is it alters behavior of the existing firms. They talk about the existing firms as called the incumbent firms. So incumbent firms in this case would be like British Gas. Why is it going to alter their behavior? Well, if you're British Gas and you now know that consumers have more information, what are you likely to do to the prices you charge consumers for your product? Well, do you agree that you're more likely to reduce your price? Do you agree that you're more likely to treat your customers really well? You're like, oh, love you guys, stay loyal, right? In that case, then, even if new firms don't enter the market, but the existing firms alter their behavior and reduce their prices and improve their quality, you agree that that is exactly what the customers want. It's just a question of getting low prices, whether it's through firms entering the market or whether it's through the existing firms behaving like there is competition. Who cares? If you're now doing the second thing, by the way, where you say other firms haven't entered, but the existing firms alter their behavior, there's a great way to wrap this up, which they have on the mark scheme, is to say, in this instance, then, the CMA would have acted as a surrogate for competition, which I know sounds really weird. But the idea is they've carried the competition. Even if you don't get new firms entering the market, if the existing firms alter their behavior and reduce their price, the CMA has been effective at promoting competition and promoting, or at least making firms behaving like there is competition. That is an exceptional analysis, by the way. Like, I can't tell you how good that is. That is your first analysis, the go-to evaluation. There are two, by the way. The first is the one that I want you to do for this one because of the data. But the second is in the event that you get a 25 marker about the effective regulation and how effective regulation is, well, or what methods of regulation will be effective. You can do the whole database, contestability, all of that. The evaluation, number one here is this sentence here. Customers could each save over £300 a year by switching to a cheaper deal, but they appear reluctant to do so. People tend to exhibit habitual behavior. In particular, type of habitual behavior that they exhibit is something called inertia. Inertia is the idea that you could save money, for example, by switching it to another provider, but you just can't be bothered for the effort of doing it. Do you know who in particular is likely to definitely exhibit inertia, or more likely to exhibit inertia? The elderly. And the elderly, by the way, you could also develop that paragraph by saying are less likely to be able to use the technology. So may not be able to use this database because it will obviously be online, right? So therefore, it may not be that effective at promoting competition. It might not actually make the market that much more contestable. That is the one I want you to do for this question, by the way. But in terms of a 25 marker, you could also talk about how actually, even if they have more information kind of at the tip of their fingers, the barriers to entry the market still are very high because it requires huge amounts of output to be able to tap into the economies of scale that exist in a market like energy and be able to compete on a cost and therefore price basis with the likes of EDF and British Gas. Therefore, even if consumers are more informed about different prices, realistically, very few firms will have the money and the amount of like market share to be able to tap into the economies of scale to enter that market. So it's not going to translate into new firms coming into the market. Anyways, that's our first analysis and our first evaluation. Second analysis. Of the ones that are available here, I feel like this is the better one. It basically has, a price cap. Yeah. So another policy that can be used to increase competition in the energy market is to enforce a price cap. Right. On that note, I'm going to quickly do a new share of my now working board and talk about price caps really quickly. Let's go on a tangent and deal with what price caps are and how you might get questions on price caps. Right. There are two types of price caps that you need to be aware of from the theme 3 perspective. Number one is something called RPI minus X. Let's deal with RPI minus X. RPI, as you should know from theme 2, is the retail price index, which is a measure of inflation. So this is normally regulation that you enforce on like natural monopolies or really big firms like the energy firms. Yeah. So let's say that in a given year, the retail price index, the level of inflation was 6%. Okay. Now the X, that figure is set by the regulator. So let's say hypothetically, they set an X equal to 2%. That means this firm, the upper limit of how much they can reduce their price, increase their price, is by whatever that formula comes to. So obviously, all of you can do 6 minus 2 in your mind, and you get 4%. In other words, the upper limit of what the firm is able to increase its price by here is 4%. Slightly harder question is that in nominal terms or in real terms? To clarify and make your life easier, when it comes to RPI minus X and RPI plus K in a second, whatever you plug in into that formula and you churn out on the other side is always in nominal terms. It is just what the change in the price is. I appreciate that's confusing because it uses RPI to get the actual figure, but nominal is just the change in the price. So here, the firm are going to change their price, raise their price by 4%. So in nominal terms, it's going up by 4%. To calculate real, you do the following. I'll write this down in your notes, by the way. Real is equal to nominal minus inflation. Okay, let's now plug it in based on what we just did. So we said, okay, in this example over here, where RPI was 6% and X was 2%, the upper limit of what this firm could raise its price by was 4%. So we have nominal is equal to 4% minus inflation. What is the inflation in the example I just gave you? Well, the inflation in the example I just gave you is 6%. So what is 4 minus 6%? You get minus 2%. In other words, in real terms, this firm is 2% worse off. Let's understand why this is the regulation and what they now need to do. One of the first definitions that you should have found, or kind of you should know very well, is profit. So if I write profit as a formula, what is profit? Profit is equal to total revenue minus total cost. Now, do you agree that the revenue is limited here because I can't raise my price above the 4% in this example? What must this firm therefore do to ensure their profits are not falling in real terms? Well, the answer is that they need to reduce their total cost. Their costs need to come down. And how much do they need to come down by? Exactly 2%. This, therefore, represents the X inefficiency that the regulator perceives the firm has, and therefore they have to be less X inefficient. They have to cut their costs by 2%, otherwise they are worse off in real terms. Okay? The clever thing about this regulation, by the way, is that it doesn't just encourage firms to reduce their price, or to, cut their costs, It also encourages them to beat the target that is set for them. So, for example, if the firm manages to cut its cost by 3%, they raise their price by 4%, they cut their cost by 3%, so that's 7%, minus 6% inflation, they will be 1% better off. So it makes sense to basically enforce this type of price cap because it almost forces the firms to become more efficient. That is our first price cap. Hopefully that is pretty clear. Right, let's do the second price cap. Let's rub out all of this. Right. So the second price cap is going to be, it's called RPI. It's going to be RPI plus K. Okay, really straightforward. RPI plus K. This time, they're allowed to raise their price above inflation. But to be clear, by the way, they can only raise it by whatever the RPI plus K adds up to. So let's say the RPI was 3% and K was equal to, let's say, 2%. Well, the firm, the upper limit of what they're allowed to raise their price by this example is 5%. Again, that is in nominal terms, yeah? The important thing to understand for RPI plus K is the K factor, that percentage, they are obligated to invest that percentage of their profits into capital machinery. And that ensures the firm remains as dynamically efficient as possible, yeah? So again, so consumers, while they're going to get a higher price over time, they're also expected to get a higher quality over time as well, because the firm is obligated to keep investing profits into new technology to remain dynamically efficient. Okay, cool. Right. With that in mind, really quickly, so I'm just plugging in my charger phone. I want to go through what I regard as one of the hardest questions they've ever asked in terms of price caps, just to make sure this makes sense, by going through the 2016 old spec, Unit 3 question on a price cap. So let's go back and Edexcel, right, Unit 3. Okay, June 2016, question number 8. Right, let's have some fun. Question number 8 is as follows. Right, let me just zoom in a little bit. And we have the following. In 2014, the UK government announced that there would be a change in the price cap on regulated rail fare increases. The price changed from RPI plus 1% to RPI plus 0. Assuming RPI changes are positive, regulated rail fares will. Okay. It is so important that you guys underline key words and key phrases as you are reading the question. Yeah? So what I'm going to do is underline. This is so important. Firstly, this, that it needs to be positive, and that we've now moved to RPI plus 0. You know, all the stuff before about it being RPI plus K, RPI plus 1 is so irrelevant to this question because it's just now the price cap is RPI plus 0. So we're dealing with RPI plus K where the K is 0. Which of the following is true? A, rise in nominal terms by 1%. Okay, let's figure it out. The way we can figure this out, by the way, is to go, okay, we don't know what RPI is. All we know about RPI is that it's positive. Pick any random number for me. So let's say RPI is equal to, I don't know, 4%. Okay, so let's say RPI is equal to 4%. If RPI is equal to 4%, then let's plug it into the formula. And remember I said that when you plug it into the formula, whether it's RPI minus X or RPI plus K, the outcome of that is definitely nominal. That is the change in nominal terms. So let's go, okay, RPI plus 0%. In this case, it's going to be 4% plus 0%. It's really complicated math, guys. It's obviously 4%. Right, what did I just say? Are they raising their price by 4% in nominal or real? It is in nominal terms. That is in nominal terms. Every single time you plug it in, that will give you nominal. Right. We can automatically, by the way, rule out A, because it would only rise in nominal terms by 1% if I had done RPI as 1%. But we don't know that RPI is 1%. It could have been 2%, 3%, 5%, 10%, right? Let's now plug in this number into our formula that I wrote a second ago, which was real equals nominal minus inflation. Nominal minus inflation. Okay. If I now plug it in, I go, okay, in nominal terms, we just said that the price has gone up by 4%. So we go 4% minus what was inflation in my example? What was RPI? It was 4%. 4% minus 4% equals 0%. Okay, right. Let's just to make it really clear, do one more random number. So give me another alternative number. Let's say the RPI was instead, let's say 8%, 7%, let's do 7. So if RPI is equal to 7%, again, plug it into the formula. So you're going to go 7 plus 0, obviously is 7. In nominal terms, then it's going up by 7%. Yeah, so nominal equals 7%. Cool. Let's now figure out real. We go real equals nominal minus inflation. So what does that give us? We get 7% because it changed the nominal terms minus what was inflation? Inflation was also 7%. 7% minus 7% is equal to 0%. Hopefully now you guys see what the answer is. The most commonly selected answer that was incorrect was people chose C, remain unchanged in nominal terms. That is not true. Notice that the price changes in nominal terms by whatever RPI I've set, and I know it to be positive. The answer is D, remain unchanged in real terms, yeah? Bear in mind, by the way, the one that could have also tricked you was E. Had you not underlined the RPI changes are positive, very easily you could have selected E, because E would be correct if it were not for that statement. Fall by an amount equal to the changes in RPI. Well, yeah, if RPI was negative, then it would be true, but it can't be negative based on what they've just told us. Cool, right, let's go back to, we went on a bit of a tangent there. Let's go and, okay, drawing. Go back to the question that I was dealing with about the price cap, yeah? So what you do now, by the way, is you describe price cap, say they can increase competition by enforcing a price cap. Now give an example, whether it's RPI minus X or RPI plus K, I would always then plug in random numbers, make them up. Go, for example, if RPI equals, let's say 6% and X equals 1%, the upper limit of what the firm can raise its price by is 5% in nominal terms. They therefore have to cut their cost by at least 1% to maintain profits in real terms, yeah? This protects consumers, by the way, by ensuring that they can't exploit them through extremely high prices. It will limit how much these energy suppliers can raise their prices by, and so that protects consumers. Make sense? Now, again, by the way, it doesn't really lead to more competition. So it just, again, it makes sense to say, given this, the CMA would have acted as a surrogate for competition as they force firms to behave in a more competitive manner by keeping their prices checked or keeping their prices down. Yeah, cool. That is our analysis, the evaluation. Every single time you have a question about regulation, the easiest thing in the world to do is regulatory capture. Regulatory capture is basically the idea that the regulator and the regulated firm develop a close relationship, which results in more leniency towards that particular firm. Now, it's a bit controversial, but we could easily use the following to try to justify where there is, you can do it generically, by the way. I think there's a really good quote here to explain or imply that there might be some regulatory capture here. The CMA investigation found no evidence of anti-competitive practices by firms. Is that so, CMA? Is that so? Right? So you could chuck that in and be like, the fact that they found no evidence may indicate that there might be some regulatory capture kind of going on here. Yeah? And then that will get you the 12 marks. Why? Okay, right. Why did I do that? I want you guys to see repetition. And therefore, to see repetition, let us now open the 2019 paper and look at 6C and laugh with me. Laugh at the repetitiveness of their questions. So if I look at 2019, A2, right, 6E, watch this. If it will load, that'll be great. Discuss methods of government intervention to protect consumers within the utilities markets, such as energy and telecommunications. It is literally the same answer. You just give me slightly more depth. First analysis is create a database. Database reduces information gaps. It makes the market more contestable. It makes it easier for them to switch between suppliers. new firms have an incentive to enter the market because they know if they offer lower prices, then consumers are more open to switching to them. The incumbent firms are more likely to reduce their prices and act as if there is more competition because the threat of entry has become real. In this instance, then the CMA is the government, by the way, would have acted as a surrogate for competition. First analysis, first evaluation. However, consumers tend to exhibit habitual behavior. Oh, by the way, look at the 10 marker. Why are many landline owner customers not switching to a cheaper telephone provider? Why do you think? Habitual behavior, inertia, especially the elderly. Now, I know we're not dealing in this question about landlines. We're dealing with like the energy supplies, but you can use that to support your point. You go, look, it says that they haven't switched landlines because they exhibit inertia. Well, the same thing is probably true in terms of the energy market. They may not be switching or maybe they not be willing to switch because they're not bothered for it. They're used to what they like what they're used to. Plus, the elderly might not be able to use technology effectively. Second analysis. Now here, I probably would do a maximum price scheme instead of a price cap, just because it has a diagram. But it's the same point really, and also because the evaluations can be very specific to that. So can I just quickly go on a tangent and draw a maximum price scheme to do some theme 1 revision? Let's page, new share, right, back to the tab. Okay, right. So you should all know, maximum price scheme diagram looks like this. S1, D1, right, the initial equilibrium, I'm going to label that as QE. I'm going to label this as PE. And the maximum price, you set it below the equilibrium. So that's P max. This is max price. Okay. Every single time you have a price, by the way, to determine how much is supplied and how much is demanded, you simply go across from that price until you hit the relevant curve. So can you see that I've hit that curve there? What curve is that? That is domestic supply, or supply, sorry, in this market. So QS, that's how much the energy firms will supply of the energy. And this is QD, right? Can you see that there is excess demand because demand exceeds supply by that distance? Okay. In terms of the analysis, really straightforward here. The extract was talking about how energy suppliers or firms that have been exploiting consumers by charging really high prices. A maximum price scheme, if they enforce, let's say, a maximum price on each kilowatt of energy, if you don't know the metric for like energy, to say each unit of energy, it has a maximum price. This will protect, especially the most vulnerable people in society who may not be informed or may not know that they're being like exploited through high prices. Again, we could talk about like the elderly, low-income households in particular are going to be protected here because of the fact that the prices are capped, and consumer surplus therefore is going to rise. Yeah, that is our first or second analysis. The evaluation here, the reason why I think this is a good thing to do is because the evaluations work quite well, which is, however, this is negatively going to impact the revenue and profits for the energy suppliers. And if their revenue and profits are negatively impacted, one, some of the firms might shut down. So some of the firms' AR might end up being lower than their average variable cost, in which case they would need to close down, they shut down. And two is that might lead to less investment into the energy market, and consequently, it might result in like lower quality output. So there's going to be more like power outages, and you know, the service being provided might be lower. Yeah, 15 out of 15 every single day of every single year. Hopefully that's super duper easy. Right, that is another one ticked off. Right, let me just right, I said I'd go through 12 markers. Let's talk about 12 markers and just quickly get that out of the way to show you when they have what's it called? When they have a 12 marker where it explicitly says draw a cost and revenue diagram or draw a diagram, you are in major luck. Here is an example. Discuss one likely reason for the rise in BT's profits. Use a cost and revenue diagram to support your answer. When they have that, now they've said it for you very clearly. It's one reason, yeah? In other words, you do not need two analysis, nor should you ever do two analysis if they are asking for a diagram. This is why before your exam on Thursday, you absolutely need to nail drawing diagrams. So can I just show you the extract? And it will be the easiest thing in the world. In fact, I'm going to be able to use an old diagram in a sec. Right, you ready? So the extract says, so the profits are rising. Think about, by the way, straight away, if profits are rising, it must be one of two things or both things. Either the firm's revenue is going to go up, or their costs are going to go down, or both. Now, you're not going to do both because you're going to do one factor. And here we go. BT profit rises. Oh, amazing. BT Group, which includes BT Openreach and BT Retail, reported a rise in profits as revenue increased following the integration of the consumer mobile business EE. Oh, thank you very much. I don't even need to read anything else here. This is how you get 8 out of 8 analysis for a 12 marker like this. 1, straight away you say, BT's profits, one reason for BT's profits rising may be due to the merger with EE. Nice. 2, it says their profits are rising to 500, get some application straight away. As extract B states, their profits rose to £566 million in the second quarter of 2017. Now, easy peasy. The merger with EE is likely to translate in AR and MR shifting out as they share customer bases. You draw the diagram I drew earlier, if I can find it. You guys, earlier we did a merger question, we did AR and MR shifting out, you draw that. You now summarize the diagram. And you summarize the diagram by saying the outward shift of AR and MR causes the their price to increase from P1 to P2, their sales increase from Q1 to Q2, their profits increase, that's a key thing here, from P1 ABC1 to P2 DEC2. How many marks have you just got? You just got 8 marks. That should not take 8 minutes. That is an incredible question to get in an exam because it's a great time saver to give you more time for the 15 and 25 marker. We need 2 evaluations. Number one, first evaluation, you should always know is that whenever there's a merger, there's a possibility that there's diseconomies of scale. They might become X inefficient. Don't do both, by the way, for a 12, just do one. So let's say diseconomies of scale, costs therefore might be rising, so profits may not necessarily be going up, 1. Number 2, it could be that the regulator starts to scrutinize them a lot more. And actually, if you read the data, and you obviously would in an exam, here, it basically talks about this. They're being forced to reduce the amount they charge for rental charge for landline-only customers from $18.99 to $11.99 per month, as the regulator attacked existing deals as poor value for money. The merger might result in a greater degree of scrutiny from the CMA, and therefore they may limit how much they can raise their price by, or even force them to reduce their price, as it says in the extract. Therefore, their profits may not go up. 12 out of 12, easy peasy. Right, let's do another 12 marker, just so I can show you how easy this is. Let's actually look at paper 3, June 2017. Right, paper 3, June 2017. 12 marker, right. All right, here we go. It's the second question about the UK. Discuss the likely impact of the national living wage on the profitability of firms. Use a cost and revenue diagram in your answer. Okay. Well, in the extract, it will be very clear what the living wage is, but you should already know this. The living wage is basically a top up on the minimum wage for people above the age of 25, for 25 years old, 5-year-olds and above, right? And okay, what does that do to a firm's costs? Well, clearly their costs are going to go up, right? What type of cost is it, by the way? Is it variable or fixed? In the mark scheme, it actually allows you to do either. I personally think it's definitely variable, and I prefer you to do it as variable because you get to decide how many units of labor you hire, and each unit of labor is now more expensive, that you have to now pay them the living wage. Right. This is what you do. You define national living wage. A living wage is basically a top up on the minimum wage, and a minimum wage is the legal minimum a firm can pay its workers on an hourly basis. You now quote to me from the data how much it's going to increase cost by. Here you go. It's going to result in a 0.3% increase in wage costs overall. Great stuff. You now draw the diagram and explain before the diagram, actually, this is likely to result in an increase in variable costs for the for firms. Let me draw it. Let's do it. Let's go. So page, right, let's go. This is how you draw the diagram. Cost slash revenue, step 1, MC, AR and MR. AR equals D. This is MR. Quantity is derived by MC equals MR. The price is derived by hitting AR. By the way, notice how fast I'm doing this. This is how fast I want you to draw it in the exam. Mine's obviously on a pad, so it's not as nice. You guys can draw neater than this, but it will do. And then A and B. Okay. What I know is that variable costs going up should cause both MC and AC to rise. To clarify, by the way, if it's a fixed cost, only AC will shift. Because average cost is made up of both fixed and variable cost. It's total cost divided by output, which is fixed and variable. Marginal cost, though, from the very definition of marginal, is a variable concept. It's an additional unit of output. So if it's a fixed cost, to clarify, you only shift AC. But if it's a variable cost, you shift both MC and AC. Okay. The easiest way, you know how like in theme 1, you guys do shifts as outwards and inwards? Not a fan in terms of theme 3 diagrams. Think of shifts in theme 3 as up or down. Well, here, our marginal cost going to be shifting up or down? Well, they're paying a higher salary, so obviously it's going to go up. So we're going to go step 1, always shift MC first. Do not shift AC. So you're going to shift MC like this. That will be MC2. Profit maximization will occur where MC2 equals MR, which is over here. So the quantity they sell is going to go down. You then derive the price. You go up from there. So they're going to charge a higher price for their produce. P2. And now and only now do you shift the AC curve up. Now, how much you shift it up by doesn't actually make a difference. You can go from a scenario where they make lots of supernormal profit to small supernormal, lots of supernormal to normal, or even supernormal to losses. The end game is that profits are going down. It doesn't make a difference which one you do, yeah? I'm going to exaggerate mine a little bit. I'm going to like shift it up quite a bit. I'm going to have it like really high up here. Yeah, so do that. AC2, you didn't have to do that. The most important point on my diagram right now is the new quantity. Once I have a quantity, by the way, I can tell you everything. I can tell you the price by going up until I hit the demand curve. I can tell you the cost by going up until I hit the AC curve. So I dot up from Q2 till I hit the AC curve, C2. So my firm now is making a loss, by the way. It doesn't have to be making a loss, but it was just easier for me to show it. Summarize the diagram. You now say MC and AC rise due to the increase in variable costs. As a result, the price that the firms charge will increase from P1 to P2. Their sales will decrease from Q1 to Q2, and their supernormal profits will decrease from area P1 ABC1 to, in my case, a loss of P2 DEC2. How many marks have I got? I had 8 out of 8. How easy is that? That's it. That's 8 marks analysis. And now let's evaluate. Generic evaluation. Number 1. It says it in the data, by the way. The data is so helpful for this. It said that the living wage only applies to people above the age of 25. What might firms therefore do? They might just switch to hiring people who are younger. And realistically, the skills required for the jobs being done are probably fairly limited. So therefore, they very easily can switch to younger workers that are not subject to the living wage. Does that therefore increase their costs? No, it doesn't increase their costs. So that's our first evaluation. Go, maybe actually profits might not go down. It might be that actually they can just switch. 2, every time a firm pays a higher wage to workers, you can assume that productivity levels are likely to go up. And the reason why, and again, this is in the data, the reason why is because the opportunity cost of losing your job is now greater. Imagine if you were paid £6 an hour before, you're not that fussed about losing your job. If you're now paid £12 an hour, do you agree that you really do want to keep that job because it pays you a lot better? Therefore, you're more likely to hit targets, you're more likely to be more efficient. And when productivity levels go up, costs go down. So it can cancel out the increase in cost due to the living wage. Again, if I go back to the extract itself, it was a pure coincidence, by the way. Well, I think so anyway. But watch this. It says real, where is it? Hi, look, it's estimated to be higher productivity. And you know something? Productivity levels go up by exactly 0.3%. And ironically, that is exactly how much wage costs were going up by 0.3%. They can cancel each other out. There might be no impact on profitability then. 12 out of 12 every single day of every single year. With that in mind, let's open last year's paper and laugh at the easiness. Right, let's have a look. Gone past it in my excitement. Oh, wait, that's paper 3. I lie. Sorry. Let's go to paper 1. It's probably open in my tabs somewhere, but let's quickly find it here. 2022. Okay, right. Let's go. Marker. Using a cost and revenue diagram. One analysis then, no need for a second analysis. Discuss the likely impact of rising costs for coffee shops on their profitability. I mean, this one is the most insulting to your intelligence yet, because at least in the other ones, they kind of needed you to figure out whether it was revenue or cost. This time, they like, it's costs. Costs have gone up. They've gone up. Tell us what happens. Well, guess what? It's literally written out for you right here. Many costs were rising. Staff shortages meant rising wages for baristas. A 6.2% national minimum wage increase for over 25-year-olds. Oh, interesting. What is that? Minimum wage for people above the age of 25 is called the living wage. Do you know what your question now becomes? It becomes the exact question we just did. It is the exact same answer. Your analysis is going to be that essentially wages are going up. They're introducing a living wage. Costs go up, variable costs go up. You draw that wonderful diagram that we just drew. You summarize the diagram. You get 8 out of 8. You now basically explain that actually they might switch to not buying, that's too bad. Hiring younger workers, therefore might not impact them. Productivity levels might go up, therefore profits might not go down. How easy is this? Let's go. Right, that's 12 markers, hopefully out of the way, and you can smash a 12 marker now if it comes up in less time than 12 minutes, by the way. Right, let me have a look at some more questions. Some of you are firing at me. Could you do why do wage differentials exist in the UK? Okay, cool. All right, let's go through labor market and just a couple of words about the labor market. Labor market in terms of data response is a great topic to come up. I don't think it's a problem. As a 25 marker, I'm not a massive fan of the labor market. And the reason why I'm not a massive fan is because I think the theory underpinning it is fairly limited. And because of that limitation, it makes it a lot harder to flesh it out into sufficient detail for a 25 marker. For example, the June 2019 paper has a question about wage differentials in an industry of your choice. Not a fan. I would much rather have done the other question, also not great to be honest that year, was about like collusion and why firms might collude. But anyways, can I just clarify in terms of like a smaller question in particular, how to deal with wage differentials through more theoretical kind of a more theoretical perspective? And that is to go through the wage elasticity of supply and demand for labor. So let me just share my screen and let's go through that together. Here we go. Okay, so let's go through like extremes, whereby let's say a neurosurgeon versus a cashier. Yeah. If we think of like the wage elasticity of demand and supply, so WES, basically wage elasticity of supply, that is the percentage change in the quantity supplied of labor over the percentage change in the wage of labor. In other words, when wages in a particular sector go up or down, how much does supply of labor go up or down? So let's assume the wages being paid to neurosurgeons goes up by, let's say, 10%. Do you expect the supply of neurosurgeons, the number of people that are offering their services as neurosurgeons, will dramatically increase or not really? Obviously, not really. In other words, neurosurgeons, the supply is likely to be very wage inelastic for two main reasons. One, do you agree that it takes a very long time to become a qualified neurosurgeon, that it takes years and years and years? And two, you need a lot of intelligence to be a neurosurgeon, right? There are so many skills needed to be a neurosurgeon. There are so many difficult exams that you have to pass. I could never be a neurosurgeon. Therefore, the supply of neurosurgeons is extremely wage inelastic. Contrast that with all due respect to cashiers, many years ago, but cashiers, the supply in that instance is far more elastic. Why? Because if they offered higher wages for, let's say, cashiers at Tesco, do you agree there's going to be a more than proportionate increase in supply because of the fact that it's very easy for you to develop the skills? You can train someone up within like 10, 20 minutes, let's say a couple of hours, right? They are now ready to go. So the supply is much more elastic in terms of labor for low skilled compared to high skilled. Right, let's bring in the wage elasticity of demand then. Wage elasticity demand is essentially the percentage change in quantity demanded of labor over the percentage change in the wage of labor. Remember, the demand for labor is through the perspective of the firm, right? They're the ones that demand workers. Okay, again, neurosurgeons. Do you expect the demand for neurosurgeons to be elastic or inelastic? Obviously inelastic. Why? Because they're kind of indispensable to the firm. Think about like elite football players, right? So like Saka to Arsenal as an example, right? Shame Arsenal, but anyways, right? Saka to Arsenal is like indispensable. He's such an important player to them. Therefore, if he commands a higher wage, they're probably going to give it to him, right? Within reason, obviously, yeah? So therefore, neurosurgeons will be demand inelastic because they're so important to the functioning of the hospital. Whereas again, cashiers, is the demand for their services likely to be elastic or inelastic? Well, a lot more elastic and increasingly more elastic over the past like 10 years. Why? Of self-checkout machines. Self-checkout machines means that there are viable alternatives to hiring workers, and that's why the number of cashiers has gone down, by the way. In a nutshell, then, I know this is really painfully obvious, and it's like insulting that I'm even asking you this question, but why not? Who's going to get paid more, a neurosurgeon or a cashier? Yes, a neurosurgeon by far, and we can draw a kind of made-up diagram here, but I quite like this diagram. We can basically do quantity of labor and then wage rate over here. Right, so we said the supply of neurosurgeons is very, very inelastic. So I'm going to do really inelastic supply over here. And I purposely restricted the amount of neurosurgeons so that it's very limited. So supply really, really low. And I'm going to label that N to represent neurosurgeons. The demand is also really inelastic, neurosurgeons. And therefore, the number of neurosurgeons is low and the wages they get paid is very, very high. In contrast, cashiers, the supply is way more elastic. So like supply here, and demand is way more elastic as well. And so there are loads more cashiers, QC, C representing cashiers, and the wages that they're going to get paid is substantially lower, WC. Make sense? That's a pretty good point, by the way, to make in terms of wage differentials as an analysis. Alternative reasons as to why wage differentials might exist, it could be like the level of migration for that particular sector. Like if there are loads of people coming over who have these skills, then realistically the supply of labor shifts out and so wages will go down. It could be depending on whether there are multiple firms in the market and therefore you can almost like bid against each other to get your services. Or if it's dominated by just a handful of big firms, then realistically they exert monopsony power over you. An example is the NHS. The NHS exerted a high degree of monopsony power when it comes to workers in the NHS because the vast majority of jobs available to nurses and doctors and medical professionals is via the NHS. Therefore, the NHS could, if they wanted to, suppress wages, and you couldn't really do much about it. Yes, you could strike, as they're doing right now, but the power lies predominantly in the hands of the government in that example. Yeah, hope that answers that question. In terms of like generic evaluations, by the way, here is to talk about how certain things might change over time. So Even with technology advancing, perhaps it gets to the point in the future where neurosurgeons, the supply and demand becomes more elastic. It might be that you could talk about the minimum wage the government enforce to limit the extent of wage differentials within a market, etc. But again, like I said, I don't think this is great as a 25 marker. And if it comes up as a data response, the data will be very, very helpful for a question like that. Okay, right. Doesn't matter if you label AC or LRAC. No, it doesn't matter. Okay, right, I'm trying to get through. Is a case study necessary for 25 mark questions? Okay, let's talk about this really quickly, and then I have a few things that I want to go through. By the way, I am trying my best to get through as many of your questions as I can. I probably will be overrunning beyond the 9 o'clock. You're very welcome to stay along if you'd like to stay along, or you can watch it back tomorrow when it's up on YouTube. But anyways, in terms of real world knowledge for papers 1 and paper 2, you do need to know real world knowledge. It's not to say that you don't. However, the extent of the real world knowledge that you need to know is slightly exaggerated. You know a lot more real world knowledge than you realize. In the June 2018 paper, they had a question about Apple being a monopoly, owning 38% of the phone market, the smartphone market. And it was about whether monopolies are beneficial to consumers, right? Without kind of delivering or kind of going through that question. By the way, that's very similar to the impact of a merger, like tap into economies of scale, the dynamically efficient, all of that. Anyways, right? Let me show you some examples of real world knowledge that count. Real world knowledge is not just a series of stats and facts. There are a couple of things on our Instagram page, by the way, for paper 2 that we did for Ivory Coast in the UK. One of them is already outdated because the central bank changed the base rate 2 days ago to 4.5%. But anyways, this is an example of real world knowledge. Firstly, you guys obviously know Apple. It's not like alien to you. And if I say that Apple have high profits, and therefore I go, okay, and these profits have been invested to create a wider range of goods and services. Do you know examples of things that Apple have produced? Obviously, yes. If you chuck them in, that counts as real world knowledge. Give me examples. You can, I don't know, AirPods, Face ID, iPads, Apple Watch, blah, 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 blah. Now, I don't want you to list the entire Apple chart, but the point is that you go through a handful of them. That is real world knowledge. That counts as real world knowledge. It doesn't have to be, oh, their market share. I mean, it tells you the market share. You could use that as well, by the way. That other example, you know how one of the paragraphs could be that if they're a monopoly, so they can tap into vast economies of scale. What could they bulk buy? They can bulk buy like steel. They can bulk buy batteries. They can bulk buy, I don't know, whatever the parts are to produce their phone. You guys probably know parts of phones better than I do. That is real world knowledge. Chuck it in. Keep talking about it. June 2017 is a question about the sugar tax, right? Keep talking about Pepsi and Coca-Cola. Keep mentioning that they have high content sugar. Talk about how they may have led to like high levels of obesity, etc., etc., etc. So you don't need to overwhelm yourself. The best way, by the way, to get real world knowledge, if I were you, is from actual data responses from previous papers. All of the data that you're given is factual information, and it is all relevant to your exam board, because otherwise, how could they ask questions about it? If I were doing this, by the way, I'd have a couple of things about the UK supermarket industry. Off the top of my head, for example, the free phone concentration ratio, last time I checked, in the supermarket industry is 56%. By the way, they're also not going to check. So within reason, like, you know, as long as it's not a crazily wild stat that you've totally made up, they're not going to be like, oh, how dare you lie, right? The 2019 paper, by the way, wage differential one, the examiner report has an answer that gets, I think, 21 out of 25, yeah? And the kid writes the entire answer on on differences in wages amongst elite football players, right? They had something in there around, like, I don't know, I think it said like Burnley football players get paid on average £21,000 a month. I checked it, totally false, just not true. Like, it's just a completely made up stat. But in the examiner report, it wasn't written, liar, we dock them 4 marks for the lie. They don't care. Like, as long as you are trying and making a genuine concerted effort to apply it to the real world and do that regularly throughout a 25 marker, then you're all good. Yeah. Don't worry much more about your theory. Worry much more about knowing how to answer questions than like having loads of stats in your head. Cool. I hope that goes through the question. All right. Let me go through. Sorry, there's so many questions to walk through. With a price cap, would you ever put it on a cost and only diagram? Absolutely not. Never, ever, ever. Never do that. Don't do that. Okay. Okay. Cool. Do you do 2 evaluations for 12 markers? Yes, to be safe, you can actually get away with 1. One very well developed evaluation should actually get you the 4 marks. Prefer you to do 2, but if you're running out of time, do 1. Try to develop it in as much detail as possible, though. Yeah. Okay, right. Can I actually kind of, not to ignore your questions because there's so many questions on there. I have a couple of things that I think are very useful for you guys to know, including something that I noticed has not been asked for a long time. This is not in any way some sort of prediction or me knowing that this is going to come up. But one of the things they tended to ask a lot in the old spec, especially for theme 3, that has only come up in paper 3, as far as I know, in June 2018, is pricing and non-pricing strategies. that firms could use. So on your piece of paper, the question I'd like you to write down, please, is as follows. Assess pricing and non-pricing strategies that supermarkets could use to deal with the threat of entry. Something along those lines. Now, if this comes up as a 15 marker, wow, amazing stuff. I would love this to be your 15 marker, and let me explain why. So if you get this, firstly, let's dissect the question here. When we say the threat of entry, do you guys know what I mean by that? The threat of entry implies that the market has become more contestable. Now, why it's become more contestable is kind of irrelevant to this question, unless the question was, why has the market become more, why has the threat of entry increased? Yeah, in which case you have to kind of deal with that. Then it's about how the market's become more contestable. So it could be because, let's say, price comparison websites make it easy for you to compare the average price of a food shop at Tesco compared to Asda and Sainsbury's. And so consumers being more informed makes the market more contestable, blah, blah, blah. Anyways, that is not really what the question is. What the question is dealing with here is essentially, what is the implication in terms of what are the pricing strategies that they're likely to adopt? Now, hopefully you will know that there are a variety of different pricing strategies that you could use. But this particular question, and they'll all be on the mark team, by the way, I think the go-to that you should use is limit pricing. Not predatory, not collusion, limit pricing. Allow me to explain. So if I just add page. If I got a pricing, non-pricing strategy question like this, I will talk about limit pricing as my first analysis. By the way, good exam technique is use the wording of the question and throw it back in their face. So if the wording of the question is pricing and non-pricing, you go, one pricing strategy that could be used to deal with the threat of competition in the supermarket industry is to use limit pricing. Use their wording, that's your topic sentence. Give them the answer in the topic sentence. I want them to know what the topic sentence is the point. Let's talk about limit pricing and distinguish between limit pricing and predatory pricing. Limit pricing is basically where Tesco know they could maximize their profits in the short run, but instead they are not going to do so. What they're going to do instead is they're going to set their price below the average cost of potential entrants to the market. To clarify, they are not setting it below their average cost. They are not making a loss. They're either making small amounts of supernormal profit or normal profit. They're just not maximizing profit. How can Tesco set such a low price? Well, Tesco are already in the market and are very big in the market. They therefore have the capacity to tap into vast economies of scale. Right, can I just really show what that is? You don't draw this, by the way, but here's the AC curve. Yeah. Oops, sorry, what am I doing? Here's the AC curve. So costs, quantity. Yeah. Right. Do you agree that Tesco, because they have such a big market share, their output level might be somewhere over here? So their average cost is going to be very, very, very low down here. Right. Just for argument's sake, let's say the average cost for Tesco is £4. Yeah. Do you agree that Tesco could therefore offer a price as low as £5, continue to make profit, but it's a very, very low price? A new firm wanting to enter the market, that new firm, their output level will be far lower. Let's say it'll be like over here, Q2, whereby their average cost will be way higher than Tesco's at C2. So let's say their average cost is £7. Yeah. Do you agree that that firm, if they tried to charge the same price that Tesco are charging, £5, they'd be making a loss on every single unit of output they produce? Does it therefore make sense for them to offer a price of £5? Can they offer a price of £5? Not really, especially because it's a new firm. They would have to shut down, right? Why are Tesco doing this? Why are Tesco offering such a low price? Well, the key word that summarizes limit pricing, one word, is the word deter. They are trying to deter. They're trying to put off these firms that are thinking of entering the market. You go, no. You don't want to enter this market. You don't play this game. You don't want to basically try to compete with me on a cost and price basis because I can tap into economies of scale that you can only dream of, right? So if I was explaining this, I talk about how in the short run, they purposely do not maximize profits even though they could. They can do this by tapping into their vast economies of scale. Briefly give an example. If it's a 50 market, definitely give an example. If it's a 12, no need really. You could say, therefore, if they bulk buy, let's say their raw materials, or like Tesco bulk buy their produce, like eggs and bananas and I don't know, whatever, right? The cost per unit will be very low, and therefore they could charge a really low price. A new firm entering the market cannot tap into the same level of economies of scale, and therefore they cannot offer a price as low as Tesco's. This may deter the firm from entering the market. In the long run, once the threat of entry has gone, once basically Tesco have kind of back to like having really strong brand loyalty and the market barriers to entry have now gone up because of the brand loyalty that Tesco have, what can Tesco now do? Well, Tesco can now easily raise their price back up to, let's say, £8, £9, whatever it is, right? And now not only make more profit, but also make more profit without losing market share. That is a great way then to deal with the threat of entry in a market. That is exceptional analysis, by the way, for that essay. Evaluation. I will clarify, by the way, what predatory pricing is in a second, for those of you that have asked. Predatory pricing, sorry, one second. Evaluation to that, two things. One is, it still might not be sufficient to deter firms from entering the market. And the reason why is because if a firm enters the market offering a higher price than Tesco, but offering a better quality than Tesco, customers still may be open to switching. Customers don't exclusively go for the lowest prices. If that were the case, people would all shop at Lidl and Aldi. No one would go to Tesco. No one would go to like Asda, right? So that it's not just a question of offering a lower price, it's also in terms of quality. So they might still enter. And two, so real world knowledge for you, and if the data is about this, it will probably have it in the data, is that actually some firms are big enough to be able to enter the market despite this. The best example I can think of in the last couple of years, Amazon. Amazon entered the supermarket industry in the UK, Amazon Fresh. They therefore can compete with Tesco on a price basis, because even if they're making a loss initially, Amazon is so big, it's fine. They can cross-subsidize from other parts of their operation where they're making vast profits. So it is not sufficient to basically stop massive firms entering the market. If Google wanted to open up a supermarket in the UK, trust me, Google could do it. Yeah, that's our first analysis and our first evaluation. Really quickly, before I do the non-pricing strategy, let's talk about predatory pricing with the following example. Right, so whenever I teach this, I always give the following. So I obviously can't hear you guys repeating it back to me, but I am secretly judging you guys, well, very openly judging you guys based on the following question. Have you read Harry Potter? If the answer is no, get a childhood. Go back and get your childhood back, because it's amazing. Right, spoiler alert. So you want to close your eyes and ears if you still intend to read it or you haven't seen any of the books. But basically, one of the characters, Dobby, he dies. Right, we're going to resurrect him, though. We're going to bring Dobby back to life. So imagine that Dobby has come back, and guess what? Dobby has opened up a newsagent. Here we go. Dobby's newsagent. Dobby. Across the road from Dobby is big bad Tesco. Now, Tesco are not too fond of Dobby, because from Tesco's perspective, sometimes a lot of customers, rather than going to Tesco to buy, let's say, a pint of milk or a loaf of bread, it's just much easier to go into the little newsagent and buy it from there, rather than going to the massive superstore across the road and getting it from there. They're not too pleased about this, because he's eating into their market share, basically. Let's say initially, Dobby offers a price of £1 for his milk, and Tesco offer a price of £1 for their milk as well. Predatory pricing is the following. Tesco now turn around and go, okay, we're going to reduce the price of milk to 10p. So that on purpose, Tesco are making a loss on every single carton of milk that they are selling. They're able to do that because Tesco are massive. They're making profits in a variety of different items. They can cross-subsidize from all their stores across the nation. There are so many Tesco's across the nation that are making loads of profits. Can they therefore absorb those losses? Well, yeah, of course they can. Dobby is now faced with a dilemma, and he has two options. Option number one is that Dobby decides to keep his price at £1. The problem, though, is that if the price is £1 when there's milk across the road for 10p, do you agree that a lot of customers are going to switch over to Tesco? What will therefore happen to Dobby's sales? They're going to dramatically fall. And unfortunately, Dobby will die. I'm so sorry. Scenario number two, Dobby's like, all right, then bring it on. Dobby reduces his prices as well. He cuts it to 10p. But Dobby now is making losses on his milk. Can Dobby absorb losses in the same way that Tesco can absorb losses? No. Dobby, unfortunately, he dies again. No matter what Dobby does, Dobby dies. Therefore, when Dobby dies, once he's left the market, once he's shut down, what can Tesco now do to their price? Tesco can now raise their price back up to £1. In fact, you know what Tesco can do? Tesco can go to £1.5p. What can you do about it? There's no options other than buying it from Tesco now. They now have more market share and more profits. To be clear, by the way, this is super duper illegal. Yeah, like they're not allowed to do this. Yeah. Now, the reason why I don't think that's a better analysis for the based on my wording is because the threat of entry implies they haven't yet come into the market. You can still make this as a point. You can say, look, once they enter the market, Tesco could engage in like predatory pricing and then kick them out again. But I think limit pricing works better. Yeah. Okay. That's our pricing strategy. The non-pricing strategy, unbelievably straightforward. Every single time, do advertising. Every single time. Advertising basically means that they are going to, if it's successful, have an outward shift of AR and MR. I drew that diagram earlier with the merger. So same diagram again. An advertising campaign that's successful causes AR and MR to shift out. And as a result, they're going to get more profits. Higher profits can be used to invest into new technology. And that, by the way, creates some barriers to entry as well, because of the fact that their brand loyalty is a barrier to entry. And also, by the way, advertising is a sunk cost, which we're going to use an evaluation in a second. But the definition of a contestable market is one in which barriers to entry and exit are low, and there are low sunk costs. So advertising actually makes the market less contestable, because firms wanting to enter the market, are they going to have the same budget for their marketing as Tesco are? Well, clearly the answer is no. Therefore, it actually makes the market less contestable. Advertising is therefore a really easy but very, very effective analysis for a question like that. Evaluation, sunk cost, there is no guarantee that it actually will work. You know, it's very costly, and there's no guarantee that you're going to actually get an increase in demand for your products. Two, you can argue that actually advertising is not as difficult nowadays as it would have been, let's say, 5-10 years ago, because of social media. So these small firms can actually potentially advertise. They don't need massive budgets to, like, I don't know, put together TikTok, right? Or like an Instagram post, or clearly, I don't know, right? Right? They market, right? Probably better than I market myself, but there we go. That is the analysis. That is the evaluation. Finito, right? That is pricing strategies. Okay, next, let's go. Right, quite a few of you have asked me about the question about last year's profit maximization, whether it's a sensible objective or whether they should basically do this. The 2017 paper, by the way, has a question about revenue maximization versus profit maximization. I personally think that there is a correct and incorrect option when it comes to the 25 markers, where there is always an easier option. I would avoid, like the plague, a question like that. It's just really confusing in terms of the main points that you need to do. The other question that year, by the way, was a tax on sugary drinks. Obviously, that's the one you should have done. In 2018, there was a question about externalities. Externalities is not bad if it's a 12 or a 15. As a 25, developing a paragraph about the private cost is pretty difficult, like in enough detail. But the other 25 marker was about Apple being a monopoly and whether a monopoly is good or bad for consumers. Greenland. 100%, that's the question you go with. Yeah, there is often a correct option. Last year, for example, it was about like wage differentials, I think, in terms of the labor market in 25. Forget that. 25 market you should have gone for last year was whether a monopoly is efficient. Yes, please. Amazing. That's great. So anyways, right, let's deal with last year's 10 marker then. I will share my screen again, and it will kind of hopefully address a few of the questions. So it says, question C, profit maximization is assumed to be the business objective of most firms. With reference to extract A, assess whether this is the case for coffee shop owners. Okay, by the way, if the question in a 10 marker is expressed like this, the case, rather than instead of it saying factors or reasons. If it says factors or reasons, you must do two analysis. If it's a reason, a factor, a case, I personally would advise you to do one developed analysis and one developed evaluation. I promise you, you will get 10 out of 10. There's a misconception that you need to do two analyses for every single point or every single question. If it says reasons, factors, anything plural, totally, yeah, you do. You have to do two things. If it has something like this, I would do one developed analysis. All right, let's just go through a couple of easy things that you should straight away be able to do that easily get you a couple of marks straight away. What is profit maximization? Profit maximization is where a firm is operating at the level of output where MC equals MR. Just writing that should get you a mark. That's a starting point. And now you talk about why a firm maximizes profit. And a lot of it is just logic. Why would a firm maximize profits? Well, a coffee shop may want to maximize profits as a means of expanding and to ensure that the people who set up the coffee shop are generating dividends. If I own a coffee shop or you own a business, do you agree that realistically you want to make as much profit as you possibly can? That's probably likely to happen, right? So you go, firms are likely to want to maximize profits as the owners who set up the coffee shop would be able to draw dividends from the company if they make profits. And they may be able to use the profits to expand and grow and thus generate even more profits in the long run. Why? If you make loads of profits in the coffee shop, what can you do? You can expand by opening up another chain. You can, for example, produce or be innovative, like come up with like a variety of different like flavors and coffee like options. So like, like Starbucks have like frappuccinos and different like, Christmas ones and Halloween ones or whatever. Just give like a couple of examples here. This all explains why a firm might want to maximize its profits, because they want to pay out to dividends to shareholders, and they might want to expand the business and keep generating more profit in the long run. That's enough. That will get you a decent number of marks, just that. The go-to evaluation, by the way, for profit maximization is something called the principal agent problem. And the principal agent problem is simply this. It is the idea that if you expand and become a really big firm, so the example here clearly is going to be like a Costa, a Starbucks, or a Cafe Nero, yeah? These companies that are now massive companies, they suffer from something called the divorce of ownership. The divorce of ownership is essentially the idea that the people who set up the coffee shop or the business are no longer running it on a day-to-day basis. The person who set up Starbucks is no longer there basically brewing your coffee and giving it to you. Obviously not. They can't be in 100 different or thousands of locations across the world. Therefore, this gives rise to something called the principal agent problem. And the principal agent problem is the idea that the objectives of the principal shareholders, which is to maximize profits, might not be shared with the objectives of the agent managers. Why? Because the managers, their salary often is not linked to the amount of profit that is being generated, right? They get a certain salary. They might get a couple of bonuses for maybe sales, maybe for revenue. That's easier normally to like measure, right? Therefore, they end up doing something called profit satisficing. They, the people on the ground, the managers running the coffee shop on a day-to-day basis, have more information, there's asymmetric information here, than the shareholders now. The shareholders are no longer literally sitting in the coffee shop checking to see that you're being as efficient as you can, that you're brewing as many coffees as you can, that your customer services is amazing and all of that, right? They're not there. Therefore, the agents may end up profit satisficing, where they make just enough profit to satisfy shareholders. So they make profits, but they do not maximize profits. They could have made more profits. Had they basically worked a bit harder, had they been motivated a bit more, they would have been able to make more profit. But because of the fact that they don't have that incentive, they only profit satisfice. To be clear, by the way, profit satisficing doesn't have a rule. You know how like profit maximization is a very specific level of output, MC equals MR? Profit satisficing isn't really a particular point. It's just not MC equals MR. 10 out of 10. That's your 10 marker if you get a question like that. Does that make sense? Yeah. By the way, an alternative evaluation, I think my one is better though. The principal agent one I think is better because you can develop it. But an alternative is, in reality, firms don't really know where MC equals MR. It's ridiculous to assume that marginal cost equals marginal revenue can be calculated because costs are changing on a like hourly basis. Think about one of your costs. One of your costs is like oil to like, you know, for the machines that you operate, like the coffee shop machines, right? Well, oil prices, if you look at a chart, they're like doing that the whole time. Therefore, how can you basically, you can't constantly keep changing your price. You can't be like, oh, by the way, MC just shifted up, right? You now have to pay me more for your coffee. Oh, look, it's gone down. Now your coffee's cheaper. It's ridiculous to assume that in reality, firms actually know what the profit maximizing level of output is and what the profit maximizing price is. Therefore, it's just a theoretical concept that in reality, most firms can't really implement. They can try to move towards it, but they don't really know what it is. Cool. Hopefully that addresses that question. Right, let me have some more questions. Okay, right. Just in terms of exam technique, should you read the data in detail and then decide how to answer the question, or decide how to answer the question and then skim the data for quote? Okay, let's go through it. Actually, you know what? Can I just go to overview of what you need to do in terms of the exam? What I will do is I will post onto social media in the next 2 days a document, or maybe on our website, basically detailing what I recommend in terms of timings, in terms of the paper 1 and paper 2. Yeah. Paper 1, you should definitely start with section A. I know some people in the past come up to me and go, why don't I start with the 25 marker? Look, I can't force you to not start with the 25 marker, but I really don't encourage you to. I understand that the 25 marker you think of as like the be all and end all and like the holy grail, right? There are 2 problems with starting with 25 marker. One is you haven't really warmed up in terms of the exam, yeah? Secondly, it is far easier to lose track of time in a 25 marker comparative to like multiple choice, yeah? If you do that, you might end up in a scenario where you might score really high marks on the 25 marker, but then you start marking up section A, and in particular section B, the 15, the 12, you're totally running out of time, and you might end up writing nothing. You are not allowed to write nothing in this exam. You must time yourself in a way where you answer every single question. Missing a question here is lethal. Answer it by sticking to the times that I will basically publish later on. Anyways, I would therefore start with section A, do the 25 marks. It's 25 marks, by the way. It is the equivalent of the 25 marker in section C. So go through section A, do it to the best of your ability. Guess if you're not sure of a multiple choice, obviously educated guess. If you're not sure of like a 3 or 4 marker, define it, just attempt it, try it. There's an application mark, by the way, in a 3 or 4 marker. So just at least quote the data, right? Anyways, get through section A. It should take you up to 25 minutes. Once you get to section B, the very first thing I want you to do is straight away go and read the questions, and only 2 questions in section B. And they are the 15 and the 12. More often than not, from time to time, it might not be stupidly obvious, but from most of the time, you will know what topic it is. So here, with reference to information provided, discuss whether the coffee shop market is contestable. I mean, obviously, we're dealing with contestability, so I know what I'm looking for, yeah? The impact of rising costs. Again, obviously, I know what I'm looking for. If I were you guys, I would take 2 different color highlighters into the exam. Let's say you take a green for the 15 marker and an orange for the 12 marker. You now will read the data, and you'll read the data slowly. You will process the data, and you will highlight with the right color for that particular question. So if I were looking at like the 12 mark and I had it in orange, this paragraph is getting orange. This paragraph is going to look like an EasyJet advert, yeah, because it's all about the rising cost. It's all there, right? And in particular, I probably even underline this and decide there and then, this is living wage. I am going to use this as my point. Yeah, cool. Anyways, once you've done that, you now basically go, and I don't mind whether you do it chronologically or not, as long as you stick within the time parameters of each question, and it will be detailed in the social media post that will go out in the next couple of days. Yeah, okay, cool. But hopefully that was relatively helpful, right? So that was exam technique theory. Let's go through some. What's the difference between price cap and maximum price? They're very similar. Price cap is basically linked to the rate of inflation, so it's RPI minus X or RPI plus K, whereas a price cap is an upper limit for everyone, regardless of what inflation is. It's a set price that you're not allowed to exceed. Okay, so they're very similar, but that's the slight kind of differentiation. Right, profit caps. Right, really quickly in terms of profit caps, a profit cap from the name is an upper limit on the amount of profit that a firm could make. June 2017 has a question about a profit cap as a 10 marker. What does that do? Well, it may result in lower prices for consumers, not necessarily, but it could result in lower prices for consumers because if there's a limit to how much profit a firm can make, there's no point in charging really high prices to consumers to maximize or increase their profit, because they don't get to keep any of it, right? So that could be good for the consumer. It could help protect them. The evaluation to that is actually, it might result in the firm just becoming inefficient. They start to kind of incur unnecessary costs. So that could translate into potentially lower quality for consumers, and maybe prices don't go down. It's just that the firm just incur higher costs instead of reducing their prices. On the other side, it could also be that it's really bad for the firm because of the fact that they're getting less revenue, less profits. That limits their profitability. They therefore might not invest as much into like R&D. The quality of their services might go down, and therefore some of them might even have to shut down. It might not be worth being in the market. Evaluation to that, evaluate for that. I think it depends on how high the profit ceiling is. If the profit ceiling is set really high, realistically, they're not even going to get anywhere near it, in which case it doesn't impact them really in terms of profitability. Make sense? Yeah? Okay, right. I have a few more questions. Sorry, you guys have written loads and loads of questions. I'm so sorry. I will try my best to get through what I can. But there's a particular question that I think is horrendous if it comes up. Well, actually, no, it's not horrendous. Is the following. Can you write the following as a 25 marker? Evaluate the view that a free market economy is always better than, or is always more desirable than a command economy. So let's have a go at doing this question together. Right, so I haven't actually planned this in advance, so I'm going to work it out with you guys. So the question is something along the lines of, evaluate the view that a free market economy is always more desirable than a command economy. For a question like this, I would split it up. I would do a good thing about a free market economy and evaluate with a bad thing about a free market economy. And I'd evaluate and sort of do an analysis why a command economy might be super good, and evaluate with why it might be terrible. And then in the judgment, decide on which is better. Okay, right. A free market economy is basically characterized by no government intervention. So you start off with defining what that is. The economist that advocates that is Adam Smith. And you now, in the first analysis, could talk about one of the benefits of a free market economy is that it results in higher levels of competition. And higher levels of competition could translate into lower prices for consumers. Now, the most extreme form of competition, or the most extreme in terms of it just being purely theoretical, is perfect competition. Yeah. Can I just go through very quickly how I would develop a paragraph about this by using competition, perfect competition, to illustrate that a free market is great because it would lead, in theory, to this arising. Now, I know this isn't exactly going to happen, but if we move toward like that market, that is good for consumers because allocative efficiency will be super duper high. Yeah. So one benefit of a free market economy is that it is likely to result in high levels of efficiency, or in firms being highly efficient. Yeah. You could describe how a free market economy encourages competition, and the most extreme form of this, in theory, is perfect competition. Right? You should all know, and if you don't, watch my YouTube videos on perfect competition. There are about 3 of them. That in perfect competition, firms are price takers. So if I draw the firm in isolation first, so if I have cost/revenue here, and let's draw a short run diagram first. MC. Right, you should all know that profit maximization, that they are price takers. Therefore, this is the market price they sell, and mRNA are a constant. If you don't 100% watch my video on perfect competition, you absolutely need to. And let's assume that this firm is initially making super non-profit. So let's have it as over here. C1, A, and B. Okay, right. This firm is making supernormal profit of P1, A, B, C1. Yeah? Okay. Allocative efficiency, as hopefully you all know, is where marginal cost is equal to AR. Same as saying, by the way, MC is equal to the price. Yeah? And you can explain in words why in perfect competition, allocative efficiency always occurs, both in the short run and in the long run. So can I just clarify on the diagram, MC is equal to AR is there. Do you agree? And that is the level of output they're producing. They are allocatively efficient, but I need you to understand it. Now, I appreciate there is no market that completely is satisfying all the conditions of perfect competition, but let's assume that the potato market is an example, yeah? You gotta look at the potato market, the goods sold are homogeneous. Let's assume they're homogeneous. Let's say the potatoes being sold are homogeneous, and for argument's sake, let's say the marginal cost of producing a potato is, let's say, 10 pence, okay? If anyone in the potato market now tries to charge, let's say 12p or 13p, if they offer a price equal to 13 pence for their potatoes, given that there is perfect information, there are many small firms because there's so much competition, and the goods sold are homogeneous, will anyone buy a potato off someone selling it for 13p? No, because they can get it for cheaper. Therefore, the next firm will come and offer it at 12p. They'll undercut them. And everyone basically now goes to them. Then the next firm comes along and they now offer 11p. Until eventually, they will definitely all gravitate towards 10p, right? They keep cutting their prices, they undercut one another until they get to the point where they charge a price of 10p, which is what? That is the marginal cost. Why would they not go below 10p, by the way? Why can they not offer a potato for 9p? Well, if the marginal cost, the cost of producing a potato is 10p, I can't offer you like 9p, because if I did so, I'd be making a loss on each potato that I sell. Every single firm in perfect competition then must be allocatively efficient, because they will always give you the price equal to the marginal cost. No one can charge above the marginal cost, because if they did, no one will buy it off them. No one can charge below the marginal cost, because they would be making a loss on each item. Therefore, everyone will set their price equal to marginal cost, always. So this is great. Competition then, a free market, where there's loads of competition, yields high levels of allocative efficiency, or you can even describe it as being perfectly allocatively efficient, yeah? If it was a 25, I could even develop it in even more detail and talk about how it also forces firms to become more productively efficient. Do you know what I would probably do here? I would now talk about how in the long run and draw the transition diagram between the short run and long run and perfect competition. Right, there is a video on this, but can I actually just quickly go through this, because this is a really important diagram to be able to draw. So, okay, so I'm going to have two diagrams side by side to illustrate what happens between the short run and the long run in terms of perfect competition. So we've got price here, quantity here, cost/revenue, and quantity here. So this is the industry. These are all of the buyers and sellers in the market. And this is the firm, right? I'm not sure how you've been taught this at school, but from now on, this is what I'd like you to ideally do, please. Typically, what you would do is you would start, what I'm about to say might not make any sense. You'll see what I mean in a second, where you go number 1, and then 2, and then 3, back over here, 3, and then back over here for number 4. We're never going to do it that way going forward. Yeah, watch my video, but I'll show it here as well. We're going to go 1, start with the industry, 2, firm, 3, firm again, then 4, go back to the industry again. Right, you'll see what I mean in a second. Step 1 is really straightforward. Step 1 is you simply draw supply and demand in the industry. S1, D1, and label the initial equilibrium. Q1, P1. Right, why? Why is that step 1? The reason why that is step 1 is because in perfect competition, firms are price takers. And if the market price is P1, every single firm in the market has no choice but to sell at that price of P1. So now I can dot across step 2 to over here, P1, and that therefore will be MR1 equals AR1 equals D1. So I'm squeezing it in there, yeah? Okay, so whether the firm is making supernormal profits or losses, it's dependent on the question. In ours, we basically made them make a supernormal profit. Let's make them make supernormal profits. So let's just now focus our energy on the firm and go, okay, draw an MC curve. Normally, MR and AR will be step 2. We have it drawn already. Output is here, Q1. And I'm going to draw an AC curve like this. And that is the cost, C1, yeah? This is therefore the supernormal profits, yeah? Didn't need to shade it, but whatever, yeah? Okay. Normally, you would basically go, okay, I go back to the industry diagram now, and I shift supply, and I basically move to the firm diagram. I don't want you to do that. Let's just talk about it logically. The logic is as follows, is that if firms are making supernormal profits, are other farmers going to enter the market and start selling potatoes, or are they going to exit the market? Obviously, firms are going to enter the market. What would therefore shift, supply or demand? Supply, because there will be more sellers of potatoes in the market. Supply is going to shift outwards, but I do not want you to shift the supply curve until the end, and you'll see why in a second. Think about, though, when supply does shift outwards to wherever, right? Do you agree the market price is going to decrease? I know exactly where I need to shift the price to ensure firms only ever make normal profit. And this is the most important step. And my step-by-step, you now put your pen on the bottom of the AC curve. If you put your pen on the bottom of the AC curve there, and you draw me the new AR-MR, I guarantee you that's the answer. It is MR2 equals AR2 equals D2. The price is 100% going to be there. The bottom of the AC curve is the only point at which a firm will make normal profit. It will not occur anywhere else. Last thing on that diagram before I transition back is I go, okay, the new quantity, MC equals MR, is here. So this is Q2. And finally, I now know the market price. I basically go, okay, well, this is the market price, isn't it? So dot across. This is P2. This must be where the supply curve therefore intersects. Notice now, I know where supply shifts to exactly to ensure they only make normal profit. Had you shifted supply first, there is a danger that you shift it too little, in which case they continue to make supernormal profit, or you shift it too much, in which case they now make losses. In the long run, they can only make normal profit. Therefore, if you put your pen on the bottom of the AC curve and you draw the new MRAR, that is 100% the new price, and work backwards from the new price to get yourself the new price, the price for the industry as well. Cool. That is now the last part of analysis. I explain this diagram and I talk about, look, this therefore means the firms in the long run are also productively efficient because they're operating at the bottom of their AC curve. Yeah. So high levels of efficiency occur in a free market economy, at least in theory. Yeah. Evaluation. Right. I think that one of the best evaluations, there are a couple, by the way, is to talk about free riders. The free rider problem is a really effective evaluation here, because let's talk about what a free rider is. A free rider is someone that derives benefits for a good without paying for a good. Okay. The definition of a public good, the common misconception is people think of public goods as public goods because government provide those goods. That is not true. What makes a public good is two characteristics. One, it is non-excludable, and two, it is non-rivalrous. What does that mean? Non-excludable means that once the good is provided, there is no way of excluding or stopping someone from using the good if they want to. The best example, by the way, of a public good is a street lamp. So you know when a street lamp goes up on a road, do you agree there's no way of stopping me from using that street lamp? If I walk down your road and there's a street lamp and I can see, right? The only way you could stop me is if someone rugby tackles me, puts a sack over my head, walks me down to the end of the road and goes, haha, you didn't use my street lamp. I obviously, therefore, I'm not going to be excluded, right? Makes sense? It's non-excludable. Non-rivalrous. Non-rivalrous means that when one person uses the good, it does not stop or diminish anyone else's use. So if we go outside and I can see because of the lamp, do you guys suddenly go blind? You go, I can't see, your big head is in the way. No, right? Therefore, it is, again, non-rivalrous. Whereas, for example, if I buy, let's say, a seat at a football match, Theatre of Dreams, obviously, right? If I basically buy a seat at a football match, that seat is now taken, it is rivalrous. Anyways, with this in mind, the free rider problem works in the following way. Imagine you had a free market economy. And let's assume hypothetically that in that free market economy, there was zero government intervention. And let's assume there are no street lamps. We all together collectively live on a road, right? Now we get together as a community and go, guys, like, you know, Avi keeps walking in to the trees at night. Like, it would really help if we basically contribute towards getting like a street lamp, right? So what I do is I put a basket and I'm like, can everyone please contribute to the street lamps? Let's say half the road pays, the other half does not pay. The half that did not pay, do you agree, because of the fact that street lamps are non-excludable, they will benefit just as much as we do, right? There's no way of having like the street lamp turn off automatically and on, someone who pays gets it on, right? It's once it's up, everyone's going to use it, everyone's going to have access to it. So then the second month we get together again, I'm like, okay, right, one lamp was great, but like, you know, it's a little bit dangerous. Can we like maybe contribute towards a second and a third lamp, right? Again, I put the basket up. Let's say hypothetically, the exact same people pay, the exact same people don't pay. Do you agree eventually the people that pay will be like, hey, forget this, I am paying for this anymore. Why am I paying for this when you guys are benefiting just as much as us, but you're not paying for it, right? Therefore, the consequences of that is that in a free market economy, there is likely to be an under provision of public goods. In other words, there is likely to be a shortage of street lamps. In a free market economy, this is one of the strongest arguments against a free market economy, by the way. In a free market economy, if you left the market to its own devices, because of free riders, there would not be enough street lamps being provided. And that therefore is a positive externality, by the way, FYI. Yeah, you could even draw it at that point, but there's not enough of something good now being provided by the market. Hence why the government needs to intervene. So this is an argument in favor of like a mixed economy, like the government needs to do something about it. Hence why in reality, they tax us and they use the tax revenue to basically provide the social optimum quantity of street lamps. All right, let's now flip the essay and now talk about why a command economy might be good. Well, a command economy is pretty good because of the fact that it may result in the government being able to intervene to correct market failures and operate at the social optimum quantity and ensure that we are at social optimum so that they can limit or eliminate market failures that could arise in a free market. So what I would do is I basically do the following diagram. I would say, look, imagine that you had something like a factory producing carbon emissions, yeah, or nuclear power. In a free market economy, the impact of nuclear power, all the spillover effects that arise are external costs. And nothing is really done about it in a free market economy because there's no government intervention. Well, now, if you have a command economy, the government can intervene and ensure that only the optimal amount of this is produced. So let's draw negative externality. Again, there is a YouTube video of me going through externalities, so please watch it. But here we go. Right, cost/benefits. Right, the way to figure out for Edexcel, those of you that are other examples, by the way, you guys need to know 4 different externality diagrams, which is technically the right thing. For some reason, Edexcel have 2. I don't know why. It's just much easier. So the way I wanted to figure out in terms of Edexcel is as follows. You go, okay, negative externality, is that to do with costs or benefits? Well, negative, the word implies costs. Are costs upward sloping or downward sloping? Well, think about your marginal cost curve as an example. MC goes down, but it goes up straight away. So it's going to be upward sloping. We're going to have 2 slightly pivoted upward sloping lines like that, and 1 downward sloping line. The downward sloping line we can label straight away. Marginal private benefit equals marginal social benefit. We assume they're constant. What I now want you to do always is, can you see there are 2 points of intersection, 1 here and 1 there? You dot down from here, dot down from there, and across and across. Okay. Right. Negative externality is always where you are doing too much of something that's bad. Okay. So logically, there are 2 equilibrium or two quantities. Let's not call them equilibriums. Number 1, number 2. Which one represents doing too much logically? Obviously, this one, because the quantity is higher. This, therefore, is the market equilibrium. So if it was left to the free market, this is how much they would produce. This, therefore, I'm going to call it as QSO, the social optimum. Yeah. I go, this is PE then, this is PSO. Okay. Now we know where equilibrium is occurring. We know for a fact that they are overdoing this thing. This is the equilibrium. True? Can you guys see that only one of my upward sloping lines is going through that exact point? Only this line goes through it. That line must be the private cost in any externality. Private cost equals private benefit every single time at the equilibrium. That is always the equilibrium. So this is MPC. This is therefore MSC. And now you go from the equilibrium up. And this is the welfare loss triangle. Yeah, label over here. Welfare loss. Okay, in other words, if you left this to the free market, there will be external costs, because marginal social cost, really quickly to just clarify, marginal social cost is made up of your marginal private costs, so the cost of the firm doing that thing. But there are external costs that the free market fails to account for. Hence, this distance is the marginal external cost, right? Okay, anyways, the point is there are spillover effects. So for example, like the NHS costs are going to go up. There's going to be a spillover effect in terms of people's health. It might have a negative implication for, let's say, like, I don't know, local farms, if there's loads of toxic waste, fishermen, their livelihood might be impacted, blah, 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 blah. Okay, if you have a command economy, then the government can intervene. And what they can do is they can make it so that there is a tax or it's more costly to produce it. A tax causes supply to shift in. What is the supply curve in the context of this diagram? A supply curve in the context of this diagram is marginal private cost. Marginal private cost, therefore, will shift exactly through there. See the social optimum point there? That is exactly where I want to shift it to. I'm going to shift it parallel. I'm going to do MPC plus tax. The new equilibrium quantity then, where MPC equals MS, MMPB there. Can you see that we're now at the social optimum and the price is the social optimum price? I know it looks like, by the way, on the diagram that we still have welfare loss like this, but we don't. The reason why we don't is because we're not producing beyond this quantity. It would only be welfare loss if we were still producing a higher quantity like over here, but we're not. We're producing this. This is therefore eliminating welfare loss. Government intervention, that is great. We talk about as a command economy, it can help to fix negative externalities like this, draw a diagram, explain it, and therefore society gets everything produced, at least in theory, at the social optimum quantity. Okay, that is the an analysis for why a command economy might be good. Evaluation, right, there's quite a few. Which one in particular do we want to talk about? I think one of the main ones you want to talk about is that it removes incentive functions. So firms do not have, for example, now an incentive to innovate. They don't have an incentive to invest into like new technology. Pharmaceutical companies now don't have an incentive to try to create or come up with new drugs, because what's the point if you don't get to keep any of the profits, because the government now distribute where incomes go, where money goes, where resources go. Everything is decided by the government, right? It removes the incentive, the kind of profit incentive, and therefore you end up with high levels of inefficiency in the economy. It's likely that very few people will have the motivation, for example, to do, I don't know, what's the point of becoming a neurosurgeon now if you're not going to get paid? If you're going to get paid the same amount or very similar amount to someone who is, let's say a cashier, why would you just not be a cashier? Does that make sense? So you can kind of talk about something along those lines. I think it makes a bit of sense to evaluate along those lines. There may be a better evaluation. I'm just not thinking of anything right now, but anything like that would work. Anything bad about excessive government intervention. Oh, actually, a pretty good one here is government failure. How does the government know where to set, like, what social optimum is? Very subjective. It's hard to decide what external costs are. External costs can be caused by a multitude of different factors. So the government intervening could easily result in unintended consequences. So, for example, if they tax cigarettes, that might incentivize, that's quite good. They tax cigarettes, two things might happen. One, it might incentivize people to turn to the hidden economy. And the hidden economy means they might get those cigarettes. The government don't collect revenue. So that's the first issue. And two is the government might end up pushing people to the hidden economy, and the products they end up buying are unregulated. So they might be even more harmful to them. That's bad. Something like that. You can also talk about how it could result in like unintended consequences, like indirect taxes are always regressive. It's a good evaluation, by the way, because it will always impact low-income households more than it impacts high-income households. A 10% tax or 20% tax on soft drinks impacts someone who is on a minimum wage way more than it will impact a multi-billionaire, right? Therefore, indirect taxes are always regressive and therefore widen income inequality. Government failure again. Hopefully that answers the question. In terms of a judgment, by the way, I think there's a really easy judgment here, is to say neither free market nor command economy, mixed economy all the way, right? That if you left it to the free market, yes, you can get competition and innovation and low prices and all that good stuff. However, you can also get market failure and externalities. Therefore, the best combination is to leave it predominantly to the free market, but intervene to correct market failures and ensure that they don't abuse, like monopolies don't abuse their power or something along those lines. Is that clear? Right, let me have a look at some of these questions. I will do my best. I am going to wrap up a little bit soon. I am so tired. But let's have a look. How do you know whether you should define keywords at the start of the answer or not? I mean, if you can clearly see there's a definition, define it. If it's not clear, there's no definition, just jump into the essay. Yeah, don't worry about it. It's really not important. Example, June 2018, paper 3 has a question about the microeconomic and macroeconomic impact under this paper 3, but like of an increase in demand for coffee. What am I defining there? Coffee, demand, nothing. There's nothing to define. Just jump into the essay in that example, right? But if I was doing a question about, let's say, last year's paper about a monopoly and efficiency, I would probably define a monopoly by giving a couple of characteristics. I would probably define productive and allocative efficiency in the introduction as well, to give some context around, the question. Should you start with definition of section B questions? Yes, but very quickly. Yeah, imagine it's not an extra mark. If you're running out of time, don't worry about it. It's not important. But yes, if the question is, let's say, price discrimination, then very quickly define price discrimination and then go into kind of the answer. Right, let me have a whiz through some of your questions and see. I'll kind of prioritize any that I think will help the majority of people. Okay. Use data, please. You should, by the way, use the data as often as you can, even if it doesn't say with reference to the data throughout your data response answers. Your own knowledge is completely valid as well. And if you have real world knowledge, you can chuck it in. But you're rarely going to do that. You're just going to do that 25 marker. Use the data as much as you possibly can. Right. Difference between diseconomies scale and excellent efficiency. Hopefully I clarified it earlier. If I haven't, let me know or watch back the video because I hopefully explained it. Diseconomy scale in a nutshell is basically where you're still on your AC curve, but you're on the upward part of the AC curve, whereby as your output's rising, so is your average cost, because the company is basically pretty difficult to organize and like manage. Whereas excellent efficiency is that you're not even on your AC curve anymore. You're operating above your AC curve due to a lack of competition. You're basically being very, very inefficient because of the lack of competition. Right. Backwards bending supply curve is not part of the Edexcel board. For those of you that are AQA, you guys can do that. I don't unfortunately have time to go through that, but Edexcel, if you've been taught that, you are not to write about that in an exam. You don't need to. Do I have any guesses about what topics will come up? I mean, my guess is as good as yours. Yeah. I personally think that a couple of topics are slightly hot topics in terms of not being asked for a while. Regulation being one. I think another one is pricing and non-pricing strategies that I covered with you guys earlier. I also think potentially mobility of labor, maybe as a 10 or an 8 marker would but I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. Yeah. Right. In terms of shutdown diagram, you will not draw a shutdown diagram. You will basically be drawn a shutdown diagram and basically be asked to figure it out in section A. As a really quick example, then I'm going to do one more essay and then we'll wrap up. January 2011, actually 2012, I think it might have been. No, 2011, I lied. Unit 3. I'll just show you very quickly an example of a question about shutdown, and then you can attempt it by yourself in your own time after the course. After this, but here you go. So Jan 20, no, I'm starting to doubt myself. Is it number 11 or 2012? It's 11. I shouldn't doubt myself. This is the question, yeah? Here's an example of a question about shutdown, yeah? Attempt this question later on. Okay, cool. Right, I'm going to do one last essay with you guys to wrap up. Which one should I choose? I lied. I'm going to do two things, but very quickly. One out loud, really fast. One of the questions that could be asked is that what's better, a tax or a pollution permit? Yeah. You know the diagram I just drew a second ago, or you know what? Let me show my screen here. I could have drawn this from the perspective of a tax, but I can also, by the way, do this diagram as that plus permits. If you get a question about what is better, that or that, your analysis, just do one analysis about what the good things are about permits, and then evaluate what are the good things about tax, evaluate, and then in the judgment, basically take a side, and I'll tell you which side personally I think you should take here. So if you get a question like this, well, permits, one of the key things about a permit is that it internalizes the external costs associated with pollution. So if they, for example, issue permits to the airline industry, so for example, they get them to have to buy permits to enable them to pollute up to a certain amount, and any excess above that, they get fined if they exceed their allowance. And they now, the permits, as you hopefully all know, are tradable, meaning that the government give them out for free in the first phase. And then between yourselves as firms, you can now buy and sell permits from one another. Okay, right. What that does is that it incentivizes firms to switch to green energy. It also incentivizes them to try to reduce their carbon emissions, because if they reduce their carbon emissions below their permit allowance, they can then sell the excess permits for a profit. Analysis number one. Evaluation to that could be something along the lines of, there's loads. I'm trying to which one. It is difficult to attach a monetary value to external costs. It's therefore difficult for the government to actually know how many permits they should issue. You know, carbon emissions are not caused exclusively by the airline industry. There are other very polluting industries in the world. And actually, you doing it in your country is just your country. Pollution is obviously a global issue, right? So you could talk about that, and you could say, therefore, the government may not know how many permits they should issue in the first phase. If they give out too many permits, then each permit will be fairly cheap, right? If there are loads of permits in circulation, it's very easy to get a permit because like loads of companies are going to have excess. So the price of a permit will be very low. The impact in terms of cost for firms will be very limited. If, on the other hand, they restrict the number of permits quite a lot, then it actually might backfire because of the fact that the permits can become so expensive that some firms' costs go up so much that those firms shut down. Unintended consequence there, that is government failure. One analysis, one evaluation. Taxation, very easy. You can draw a tax diagram. You can maybe actually, do you know what I would do? I would actually, if I was a 25 marker, be dealing with the tax diagram as a cost and revenue diagram. Taxes would cause MC and AC to go up. Yeah. So you draw that, talk about how some firms basically profits are going to go down. They have less money to invest. They may have to lay off workers. They might even shut down. It may incentivize consumers now to switch to alternatives, like to substitutes. So instead of using like a plane, I don't know, take a train. I mean, that's also fairly pollutant, I guess. Cycle to France, right? It's a rubbish example, right? But like, don't take a plane. I don't know, right? Whatever. Like, people might basically have an incentive to do something other than maybe go on holiday, right? Rather than going on holiday, do a staycation. Stay here and just stay on YouTube and watch my videos and have a wonderful time over summer, right? All of that. Cool. Right. The evaluation to that, very easy. Effectiveness depends on the PED of that particular good. If it's inelastic, it's highly ineffective because the incidence of tax will fall mainly on consumers. They'll shift it over to the consumer. You could also talk about how taxation is always regressive, like I did earlier. That works really well. So therefore, it might result in income inequality because it will impact low-income households more than high-income. For example, here, low-income households might be priced out of going on holiday now, whereas high-income households can continue to pollute and go on holidays. Obviously, that is regressive, and therefore it worsens income inequality. Government failure. Judgment. What would I do in the judgment here? Be clever if you can. In the judgment, by the way, it is not a conclusion. Yeah, just to clarify, you're not going on in conclusion or to conclude. You will write something along the lines of on the balance of evidence. And here, I think you should definitely take a side. And the side that I want you to take for a question like this is taxation is better than permits. And the logic is this. Do you agree that taxes cause the number of units, the price, to go up? Yes, but so does a pollution permit. Do you agree that both pollution permits and taxation cause the number of units consumed to go down? Fair. So they do the same thing. There's one difference. The one difference is that the government also generate tax revenue, which they can, fancy word time, hypothecate. Hypothecate basically is a fancy way of saying the government pledge that whatever tax revenue they generate, they invest back into the market failure. So for example, they might be subsidizing alternative forms of like energy, or maybe subsidizing firms themselves who might want to take up like greener forms of aircraft, etc., make it cheaper for them to buy that technology, etc., etc., etc. So that's why a tax is probably better, because you get the added benefit of the government generating tax revenue. Okay, last essay, and then I will leave you to go to sleep and enjoy the rest of your lives. I have a choice of essays. Let's say you get a 25 marker on the following. 25 marker says the following. It says, evaluate the view that price discrimination is always beneficial or harms consumers, or something to that effect. Evaluate the effect of price discrimination on consumers in a market of your choice. Let's deal with this to wrap it all up. So, firstly, what is price discrimination? Well, price discrimination is where a firm is charging different consumers different prices for the exact same good or service, which is really important to understand, yeah? Let's break it up in terms of how we would analyze this by being clever with our plan to ensure that we don't limit ourselves in terms of points, yeah? So if the question is just about whether it's beneficial for consumers, this is what I would do. I would start by describing price discrimination in the introduction, and then I would talk about how price discrimination should lead to higher profits for the firm. And this is where we have to draw the diagram. Let me draw the diagram and explain the diagram to you guys in a way that hopefully makes sense. By the way, this diagram causes a lot of controversy. Okay, that is a diabolical attempt at drawing the diagram because I'm running out of space. Let's try this again. Let's go again. Right. Okay, so I'm going to have 3 diagrams side by side. So, by the way, the industry that I'm going to do is the rail network. I think it makes a lot of sense on purpose because I could say a lot of things in terms of my depth and analysis. So imagine we have, so cost slash revenue, cost slash revenue, cost slash revenue, quantity, quantity, quantity. Okay, these are the sub-markets. So the sub-markets I'm going to divide this up into is students, adults, and over here is rail company. Okay. The first thing to understand about price discrimination is that the marginal cost for the firm is constant. Let me explain why. If I go on the train and I sit on the chair, does it cost the rail company, cost by the way, importantly, any more or less if any of you sit in that chair? Not at all. The cost of them giving up that seat or providing that seat, let's say cleaning it up, is the same no matter what. So in the cinema market as well, as an example, the cost of the cinema providing that seat, let's say cleaning up the seat, is the same regardless of whether it's an adult sitting there or a student sitting there. Therefore, the first thing I want you to do is basically draw a constant MC curve across the submarkets, but to make my life easier, I also want you to set it equal to AC. Now, I appreciate that certain textbooks will have MC like there and then AC above it. Not bothered for that. It will get credit. I promise you will get credit. There are like 3 or 4 variations of this diagram. Just do this. It will save you time. So you go MC equals AC. And finally here, MC equals AC. Okay. The third diagram is where you can kind of show off a little bit. The third diagram for the rail company, what I want you to do is start off at a really high point on the y-axis. And initially, when the price is really high, do you agree it's a fair assumption to assume that only adults can now afford to go on the train? The students are priced out because they don't have as much money as adults. So demand starts off being really, really inelastic like this. But then at a certain point, at any random point, just as long as it's above the marginal cost, so like over here, yeah? Now the price is low enough that we can assume the students can enter the market. If the students enter the market, is the demand amongst the students elastic or inelastic? Well, the demand amongst the students is elastic, and we'll talk about why in a moment. Therefore, the demand curve now becomes more elastic. So it will kink outwards. It will not the kink demand curve, just to clarify, but it will go like this because the students have now entered the market. Marginal revenue is half the slope of AR, so roughly like this, yeah? Okay, watch this. Profit maximization will occur where MC equals MR. Here you go. This is QE. And the market price would basically, price would be this, PE. Supernormal profits is therefore this area here. Cool? Okay, from here on, the diagram becomes really straightforward. The adult market, is it elastic or inelastic? Well, realistically, adults are likely to be inelastic in price. So in demand, sorry. So you start off really high up on the y-axis like I did and make it really inelastic. So like AR was D's there. Marginal revenue is there. That was not very beautiful, but it will do. This is Q2. So mine's really squashed together because of being on a pad. And this is P2. Make sure you draw big diagrams in your exams, by the way. I forgot to mention this earlier. It is really important that you draw really big diagrams, yeah? Okay, so that's the super non-profit they extract there. Now the adults we know are the students are gonna be elastic. You see where I kinked the demand curve over there? Let's start at a relatively similar point and make it fairly elastic. That's AR equals D. And this is MR. Profit maximization, here you go, Q1. The price is therefore this P1, and that's super non-profit. Okay, can I just clarify something about this diagram? Because there are a lot of misconceptions about this. The common misconception is that this diagram plus this diagram equals this diagram. That is not what this is showing. What this is actually showing is, you see that third diagram, the rail company, that is the amount of profit they would have made if they had set one universal price, PE. If they had just set one price, that is the amount of profit they generate. But by price discriminating and charging different prices to adults and students, do you agree they make substantially more profit by adding these two together compared to that? That is what this diagram is showing. And I need you to understand that because you can explain that, yeah? By the way, if this was a data response rather than a 25 marker, you could be really clever here by having application marks. You know, in the figure, they'll normally tell you the price of like an adult ticket and the price of a student ticket. Write the number in. It's double application. Application for the diagram, but application for writing in the number as well. So let's say the price here was £105. I don't know, this was like £65. You write that in. Anyways, first analysis. First analysis is now to say this, is that one reason why consumers may benefit from price discrimination is that the firm may become more dynamically efficient. You now draw the diagram and explain the diagram in detail. The way you explain it is as follows. You go, the demand among students is likely to be price elastic. Now, an easy way of developing 25 and 15 markers is to ask yourself a very basic question in the exam. And that question is, why? Why? Why is it elastic? Why did that thing happen? If you justify why, it will give you another 2-3 chains of reasoning easily, or at least one chain of reasoning. So here we go. Why? Why is the demand among students likely to be elastic? Well, they're less likely to have income. They're more likely to rely on pocket money. So you can go, this is because they're less likely to have a stable job or income. And therefore, if its demand is elastic, what should you do to your price? Therefore, a decrease in the price by the rail company for the student market would lead to a more than proportionate increase in demand and higher revenue for the rail company. That's the student market. Let's deal with the adult market. In terms of the adult market, why is it inelastic? You've got the demand is inelastic. Why? Adults are more likely to have an income, right? Therefore, an increase in the price would now lead to a less than proportionate decrease in demand. Hence, again, they would make more revenue. By price discriminating, they would generate more profit than if they had set one universal price, PE. These higher profits can now be invested in. Time for you to add some real world knowledge. What can the train company do with the extra profit? Well, they can invest into improving, let's say, their services by becoming more reliable. They could invest into faster trains. They could invest into, I don't know, an app to make it easier for you to book your train tickets. I don't know, whatever, right? They could make it easier, I don't know, comfier seats and AC, blah, blah, blah. Don't go too crazy. But now you talk about how this is beneficial for consumers. And as a consequence of that, the consumer is benefiting due to dynamic efficiency going up. Analysis 1. Let's evaluate. Easy evaluation here. I chose a rail company on purpose, by the way, because you could try to argue that profits might not go up, because there are two things that occur here. One is there's an added cost for the firm. The firm have to now police this. They have to ensure that actually students are really students, right? The people buying student tickets are genuinely students. There is a high chance of something called seepage in this market. Seepage is a fancy way of basically saying infiltration between the submarkets. In other words, if adults are able to buy student tickets, that is seepage. And why is it likely that seepage will occur now? Because do you agree that the vast majority of tickets are now bought either by you in the machine at a station or online? It is not a human being that's going to be there going, can you show me your student ID? Therefore, is seepage likely to occur? Big time, yes, right? And therefore, if enough adults take the risk and get away with basically paying for a student ticket rather than an adult ticket, the rail company might be losing profit rather than getting higher profits. And actually, maybe if it's so costly for them to have loads of inspectors on every single train checking all the tickets, the added cost they get might offset the extra revenue they get. So they might not make more profit. So then actually consumers might not necessarily benefit. They're not going to get better quality. If anything, profitability might go down and the quality might end up going down. Analysis, eval. Second analysis. Second analysis is now to zoom into the submarkets. Who benefits? Well, clearly the students benefit, right? In particular, then you could talk about, well, people in the submarket, the elastic submarket, will benefit through lower prices. If it were not for price discrimination, they would not be able to offer them these lower prices. And this is highly beneficial. And this is where you can show off your economic knowledge. I chose the rail company on purpose. Why? Because rail allows me to now say, by offering lower prices to students, bear in mind, students, by the way, typically goes up to like the age of 25. That's normally what they would categorize as like a student. It improves the geographical mobility of labor. And for people who've just graduated out of university, who may not be able to afford living in places like London, they now can live outside of London, but can travel into London to take up those jobs, geographical mobility of labor. Yes, please, right? It is also really beneficial for people because it will mean that they can use that service or the train services to get around, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like, as in, that's pretty thorough, by the way, especially when you develop the point about geographical mobility. That's excellent. Eval. Obviously, the eval is now the adults. And you're talking about how they're going to be worse off. Is it true that every adult is likely to have an income? No, of course not. A lot of adults are going to be unemployed. And this is therefore going to be really problematic, especially because low-income households now may be priced out of using the trains. And do you know how we can develop this in even better detail and show off? Do you agree that train services and travel generally is likely to be an inferior good, where its YED will be negative? If you had income, or if you had high income, you're more likely to have a car. You're more likely to travel without public transport. But the moment your income goes down, typically you demand rail travel more. But if you now make it so that there's a higher price for rail travel amongst the adults, this is going to basically be really detrimental to low-income households. It worsens income inequality, and it makes it so that people in that group can't even access the train services anymore and are now completely geographically immobile. Problemo. Judgment and your happy days. Yeah. The judgment basically could be something along the lines of whether it's beneficial for consumers depends on the submarket they are in and whether the profits are invested. If the profits are invested, the adults might be willing to accept the higher prices because they also get higher quality, right? But if it's the case that actually price discrimination is mismanaged and results in lower profits, or they pay out the profits to like shareholders in the form of higher dividends, then it's overall probably detrimental and not a good thing for consumers. Cool. Right. I hope that was helpful. Sorry for those of you that I didn't answer some of your questions. I'm so sorry that I didn't. I will be back for a paper 2 session next, I think Saturday. I don't know myself, but it's on Instagram. So please fire your questions ahead of macro. Good luck for the paper 1 exam, you guys. I hope will do absolutely amazingly well. I'm majorly rooting for you, and I hope you do incredibly well. And yeah, I'll hopefully see you guys for the paper 2 session and then for paper 3 later down the line as well. All right. Thank you. Good night.